It's election night in America continued as this country is entering 48 hours of history and uncertainty.
Trump allies in Congress are right now preparing for a futile, seditious challenge of the electoral vote count as the final balance of power here in Washington, D.C. is on the line.
After a contentious fight for the White House, the fate of the U.S. Senate is now up to voters in one state.
People of Georgia.
Magnificent Georgia.
Will Republicans keep control of the Senate?
Let's go get it done, Georgia.
Or will Democrats win it back?
It is within your hands.
Tonight, the results of two high-profile Senate runoffs. Democrats Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock, aiming to build on President-elect Biden's historic victory.
Welcome to the new Georgia. Welcome to the blue Georgia.
Georgia voters, send Donald Trump packing.
Republican incumbents David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler seeking to hold on to their seats after President Trump lost Georgia and re-election.
We are going to show America this is a red state.
We're the last line of defense.
Will the outgoing president help or hurt his party by denying his own defeat?
We will never give in. We will never give up.
Georgia certainly wasn't going to stand by and let Donald Trump toss out your votes.
This is CNN's coverage of Election Night in America continued. The balance of power, the Biden agenda, and the big stakes for the GOP.
Everything that we've achieved together is on the line.
This is it. A new day for Georgia and for America.
The people are choosing. The nation is watching. And anything is possible until the last vote.
These are live pictures coming in from Georgia's capital city, Atlanta. The state holding enormous influence over the U.S. Capitol, which is now set up for Inauguration Day. Will incoming President Biden have a Democratic Senate on his side? We want to welcome our viewers here in the United States and around the world. I'm Wolf Blitzer, back right here in the CNN Election Center. And we're standing by for the first results in Georgia's unprecedented double Senate runoff. Polls close in just a few hours. Democrat Raphael Warnock, a pastor at Martin Luther King Jr.'s former church, is challenging GOP Senator Kelly Loeffler, a co-owner of a WNBA team. And Democrat and former journalist Jon Ossoff is running against Republican incumbent David Perdue, a former CEO of Reebok and Dollar General. Democrats need to win both seats to take control of the U.S. Senate for the first time in 6 years. That would give a significant boost to incoming President Biden and his ability to push through his agenda. Republicans need to win only one of Georgia's seats to keep control of the U.S. Senate, and that would put Mitch McConnell in position to stay on as the majority leader and stand directly in Biden's way. We could get early clues about the outcome when we reveal the first Georgia exit poll results in the next hour. Right now, let's bring in Jake Tapper. Jake?
Wolf, we're watching the final hours of voting. We're inside polling places in Atlanta and Decatur as we wait for Georgians to resolve the big cliffhanger of the 2020 election. Let's check in with our correspondents in Georgia now. First to CNN's Kyung La. Kyung, what are you hearing from Democrats about what they view as their chances of retaking the Senate?
Well, overwhelmingly from Democrats here in Georgia, we are hearing one word: caution. From a Democratic source with knowledge of both campaigns, the word that I'm getting is that this source remains skeptical, that if the Democrats were to manage to pull this off, it would be something really incredible because it's not supposed to happen here in Georgia. So some real downplaying of expectations there. As far as the Warnock campaign saying that they are under no illusions about GOP turnout, that they are anticipating the diehards to get out there, that these are consistent voters, and that they will vote. The Ossoff campaign is saying that they're not reading anything into the fact that things have gone smoothly, that there aren't any long lines, that they do anticipate, Jake, that they will be looking at very strong Republican numbers. They are hoping that the Democratic early vote will hold. Jake?
All right, Kyung La, thanks so much. Now to CNN's Ryan Nobles at the Republican candidates' headquarters. Ryan, what are the Republican officials saying about their party's prospects tonight?
Well, Jake, to Kyung's point, Republicans knew that Election Day was going to make or break their chances here tonight. And so far, they like what they see. They've been very impressed with the turnout in some of these strong rural counties, which were strong for President Trump and for the Republican senators that ran in the November election. Two counties in particular they point me to, Cherokee County, which is north of Atlanta. They expect that the Election Day totals there on this runoff will actually exceed what happened during the general election. And then in Houston County, which is south of Macon, that's David Perdue's home county, they're also seeing a strong turnout there as well. Now, Jake, even though the Republicans feel very good about where the turnout numbers look now, they understand that they need the entire day in order to kind of close those gaps that they saw the Democrats run up during the early vote. The Loeffler and Perdue campaigns putting out a joint statement less than an hour ago where they said that they feel encouraged by the numbers so far, but they implored those Republican voters that haven't voted yet to make sure that they get out and cast their ballot, an indication that they understand that they have to win on Election Day and win big if they're going to win this election here tonight. Jake?
All right, Ryan, thanks so much. And Dana and Abby are here in the studio with me. And obviously so much of what President-elect Biden is going to be able to do as president depends on whether or not Democrats have control of the Senate or whether or not he is at the whims of Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell.
You're exactly right. Regardless of what happens tonight or when we get the results from these pair of runoffs, it is going to be razor thin in the Senate, just as we already know it is in the House. But the difference is, as you said, whether the Democrats get to control the Senate floor means that they get to decide when legislation comes up. They get to be in charge of committees and so on and so forth. And the fact that it is so razor thin, we really don't know how it's going to play out. Traditionally, Republicans win in runoffs, especially in a place like Georgia. But there is nothing traditional about this year, especially in Georgia.
Yeah, and I think that we should be clear that this is an uphill battle for Democrats, as Kyung just pointed out. They've got to win both of these seats in order to even have that slim advantage of setting the agenda in the Senate. So that's a really tall order, and they're trying to do it in an environment in which things are so incredibly polarized. It's been interesting to see the conversation in Georgia on the Democratic side. A lot of it is about policy, but on the Republican side, it's about loyalty. It has become so much about the president, so much about who is the most loyal to him. And so I think in that environment, it's very hard to predict how this is going to go. Republican voters are motivated by such different things than Democratic voters in this environment. And I think what it means is that we don't really know who's actually going to show up or who has shown up because so many people have already voted. At the end of the day, both sides are just, crossing their fingers that they were able to get that done.
And the big wild card, of course, Wolf, is how much impact will President Trump's continued lying about the integrity of the election in Georgia and his attacks on the Republican government officials there, how much will that have an effect on potentially depressing Republican turnout today, Wolf?
We will find out, Jake, fairly soon the answer to that question. I'm here at the Magic Wall. John, weren't we just here? Didn't we spend some quality time here not that long ago?
It's good to see you. You ready for a long night?
Welcome back to the Magic Wall. Set the scene for us, what we anticipate.
This is the final. It's carried over into 2021, but this is 2020's final verdict. And as Dana, Abby, and Jake were noting, it will have a dramatic impact on the Biden presidency. Do Democrats narrowly control the Senate, or is Mitch McConnell still the leader? Georgia will settle that tonight. The map is blank right now. We're about 3 hours away from getting the first results. Another caution as we head back in November. Mail-in ballots, people who voted early in person, today ballots, they're going to come in different ways in different counties. Be patient as we go through it. Don't believe everything you see right out of the gate. But what are we looking for? Let's just go back to 2020 and look at these races. This is the presidential race. Proof Democrats can win. Joe Biden, the first Democrat to win in Georgia since 1992, and Bill Clinton in the three-way race with Ross Perot. But it was very narrow, 11,779. Still, Democrats say this is proof we can win these Senate races. So let's look at those. And let's start with this one, the true Senate race back in November, meaning two candidates. Perdue, the incumbent, Ossoff, the Democratic challenger. Republicans would argue, look how close this was. The reason we have a runoff, Georgia state law requires you to be above 50% to win. 49.7. David Perdue came that close. The Republican argument is, in that perfect storm, Joe Biden winning, he couldn't get Ossoff across the finish line, so they should win tonight. Democrats say, no, we've learned some lessons. We'll be better. Let's see how that plays out. But look how close it was, very similar to the presidential map. For Ossoff and Raphael Warnock, the other Democrat, Atlanta and the suburbs are critical. Chatham County down here by Savannah are critical. This is the straight-up race, if you will, the one-on-one race. The other race is more complicated, and you can't make too much of the November results because this is a special election. Johnny Isakson decided to retire early for health reasons, so you had a crowded field that goes on even below what you see here. And yes, the Democrat did get the most votes, 33% for Reverend Warnock, but if you add up all the Republican candidates, their total was actually higher. Again, the top two end up in the runoff because you need to have 50% by Georgia state law. So that is what we have. Two races tonight, very close. Democrats need them both. Need them both to get the 50-50 tie in the Senate. What are we going to be looking for? Let's go back to the presidential map as we go through that. You're going to look for the same thing. Number one, can the Democrats, in this case the Senate candidates, but this is the Biden-Trump race, can they run it up in Atlanta and the suburbs? This is DeKalb County. You see Joe Biden with 83%. Can the Democrats run it up in Atlanta and the suburbs? Or do the Republicans perform as they normally do in a non-Trump year in the suburbs, where especially in Georgia, the suburbs are usually more kind to Republicans? That's a big test without Trump on the ballot. And to the point Jake was making about the president attacking the election system in Georgia, does that turn down Republican turnout? Or do his voters come out just because it's a big fight, even though the president's mad at the governor and mad at the Secretary of State? Where do you want to look for that? Here's one place we can look later. Whitfield County is where the president was last night. This is where he had his big rally last night, talking mostly about himself, mostly airing his grievances, but also saying, people get out and vote. You see the margin up here for Trump, 70% if you go back. Look at the Senate race here. Just shy of that for David Perdue. Will Republicans turn out in Trump country, Wolf? That's another thing we'll be watching tonight as we go from 2020 into the verdict now as we carry these two races over to 2021.
We're going to be spending a lot of quality time here at the Magic Well, John. Thank you very much. We're soon going to get early clues about the Georgia results when we reveal our first exit poll information right after the top of the hour. We're also getting new information about tomorrow's showdown here in Washington up on Capitol Hill and the split among Republicans over the GOP challenge to President-elect Biden's win. Looking at live pictures from Capitol Hill, dramatic moments about to unfold. We're following all the latest developments in Congress. Voters in Georgia are deciding control of the U.S. Senate. On this, the eve of a potentially very dangerous stunt by Trump loyalists who are planning a doomed challenge to President-elect Biden's victory. Let's go to Capitol Hill. Our senior congressional correspondent, Manu Raju, is standing by. Manu, first of all, tell us about the events that are...
Wants Congress to overturn the results of the Electoral College, an unprecedented act, but Republican opposition is mounting to that effort. Wolf, senior Republicans, influential ones, are coming out one by one this afternoon saying an act, but Republican opposition is mounting to that effort. Wolf, senior Republicans, influential ones, are coming out one by one this afternoon saying that's absolutely not the way to go and that is not the role of Congress and would defy the Constitution. Influential Republicans like Tim Scott of South Carolina, Jim Inhofe of Oklahoma saying that is the wrong way to go, joining Senate Republican leaders like Mitch McConnell who are planning to push back very strongly against this. But nevertheless, there is a push among these House conservatives to move ahead. Tomorrow, what will occur in the House floor when they start to count the electoral votes, if one House member is joined by one senator, then each chamber will debate for up to 2 hours. Then that would be followed by a vote about whether or not to essentially throw out the electoral votes from those states. Those votes will fail in both chambers, but the question is going to be how long can they prolong this debate? I'm told from one key House member who is involved in these discussions, Jim Jordan, who is fighting this effort, that there is an agreement with 3 states right now. It's uncertain whether there'll be more. Expect Arizona, Pennsylvania, and the state of Georgia to be contested tomorrow. Whether they'll get more remains to be seen. Those discussions continue. But Wolf, expect a divisive debate among Republicans themselves about if this is the way to go. And the president himself suggesting that even Mike Pence should step in and overturn the results. But Wolf, even influential Republicans are telling me tonight that is absolutely not going to happen. And they expect it's only a matter of time. By January 20th, Joe Biden will be sworn in.
He definitely will be sworn in as president of the United States on January 20th, despite all the noise from the pro-Trump supporters up on Capitol Hill. Let's check in over at the White House. Our correspondent Caitlin Collins is standing by. Caitlin, President Trump has been turning up the heat on the Vice President, Mike Pence, as we just heard, and it seems to be intensifying.
It does, because now it's going public after it was private for several days, Wolf, and now tension, we are told, is at an all-time high inside the West Wing, because this is a treatment that the vice president is not used to. Yes, of course, he's been criticized by the president before. He has been questioned and mocked by the president before, but he has never been needled in a way that the president is doing so now, something that we are told he's been doing basically daily since Saturday, Wolf, but now it has gone public, because last night at that rally, the president said he hoped that Pence doesn't disappoint him when he goes to Capitol Hill tomorrow. And then, of course, today he claimed he has an authority that he doesn't, to reject the electors, of course, who are going to affirm Biden's win with the certification of those votes tomorrow. And basically, Pence has a really essential role, really procedural, just counting those votes. But the president has been convinced by these antagonistic advisors, people like Rudy Giuliani and his trade advisor, Peter Navarro, that Mike Pence can actually play more of a role than he can tomorrow. And he has fully gripped onto that, Wolf, and he is telling the vice president that he can disrupt those proceedings tomorrow, even though the vice president, I'm told, has gone through carefully with the president what exactly his role is going to look like. So the president is aware what it's going to be tomorrow, but we are seeing the vice president try to balance this, Wolf, what his limited role is going to be, while also trying to seem enthusiastic about these efforts to disrupt this tomorrow. And I'm told that the vice president actually took a more involved role than expected in that recent meeting with House Republicans over at the White House with President Trump on what they're going to be doing tomorrow, that strategy session. But of course, as Manu noted, there is only so much the vice president can do tomorrow.
Which is absolutely true. All right, Caitlin, we will be in close touch with you. In the meantime, let's go back to Anderson. Anderson?
Well, thanks very much. Here with the group in New York. Senator Santorum, you know Vice President Pence well. What do you think he will do tomorrow?
I think he will follow his constitutional duty, which in the case of the 12th Amendment is to preside over the gathering and to open the ballots. That's, I mean, I just reread the 12th Amendment, and that's the only thing that he has under the 12th Amendment the authority to do, which is to, as he is, he's the president of the Senate. And as the president of the Senate, as a former senator who was there for 12 years, the president of the Senate has basically no power. The Senate, long time ago, took away the power of the vice president, who's the president of the Senate, to have any authority other than to break tie votes. And then the 12th Amendment, subsequently, same thing. No power here other than to preside, to be the traffic cop, to recognize people, and then to open the ballots and let the proceedings take forth. But the idea that he has some hidden power in the 12th Amendment to reject electors is wrong. It's wrong. Number one, and number two, I don't understand, and I don't hear a lot of Republicans joining the president on this one. To be honest with you, maybe there are some. I haven't heard of any yet. It's a very dangerous thing for Republicans and conservatives who believe in states and believe in federalism, who believe in the Electoral College, and to have the Electoral College decide who the president is, not the Congress, not the popular vote. We should be standing behind the Electoral College. We had 50 states. You may disagree with them, and in some instances, I may quibble about some of the way that the votes were cast in some of these states. But the bottom line is they were certified. Those certified states reported to the Congress. And as Republicans and conservatives, we should be standing behind the states. That's who we say we're for. We're for a federal system. And we say we're for an electoral college, and we should be supporting that system.
Mike Pence is the sports announcer. He doesn't get to decide who wins the game. He's the person who opens the envelopes and says, here's the score. Here's who won, here's who lost. He can't affect it. It would be unconstitutional. It is anti-democratic. And I think the fact that Mike Pence has been paying so much attention to this means that he understands exactly what he has to do. And he also knows that it's going to make the president furious. And it's kind of a Shakespearean moment for Mike Pence. Here he has spent the last 4 years doing nothing else other than saying how wonderful Donald Trump is.
But this is the lesson that everybody learns who is around President Trump, that no matter how loyal you have been, no matter how subservient you have been, no matter how much you've debased yourself, it is never enough. And it's only what have you done for me lately?
Yeah, and the other thing is that he fundamentally doesn't believe in these institutions and norms and rules. And if you do, you're going to run into conflict with him when his interests are at stake. I mean, think of what the implications would be if the sitting vice president were to disqualify votes in order to perpetuate himself and the president in office. I mean, that would be the...
In another country, we would call that a coup. And we would call that this is like...
Al Gore, in 2000, you were probably sitting in the chamber at that time. Lost on the strength of 527 votes in the state of Florida. And there was a lot of dispute, as we all remember, about that. And he sat there and he presided over the codification of George Bush's election as president. That is the American tradition. That is our system. Yeah. Pence knows that. And he's in a vice right now, but I don't think that he can do anything about it.
And the worst thing about this is, the president, in some ways, has to be, in a country like ours, the educator-in-chief. He's got a country is a story that people tell each other about who they are and what they are. You can't see a country from a satellite. You just see a bunch of land. It's the people telling themselves the stories. It's the institution. It's the traditions. To have a president miseducate the country to the point that you now have tens of millions of people who believe that the Department of Justice that he appointed is lying, that our courts are lying, that Republican officials are lying, I mean, that all of these people are lying, and only one person's telling the truth. That's Donald Trump. That's miseducating the country.
We're getting closer to the first exit poll results in Georgia, including a read on whether Georgia voters felt that the election was valid or not. We'll bring you all those ahead.
We're standing by for our first exit polls out of Georgia right at the top of the next hour as voters are casting ballots in those two very competitive Senate runoffs. Let's go over to Pamela Brown at the CNN voting desk. We're going to learn a lot about the voting that's going on in Georgia right now. A lot of different ways people are casting their ballots.
That's right. In fact, I just got off the phone with the voting systems manager in Georgia, Gabriel Sterling. He says we're going to see a flood of the returns shortly after the polls close in Georgia at 7 p.m. Eastern. There is so much interest in early voting for these Georgia Senate election runoffs. Let's take a look at these numbers. More than 3 million people voted early for today. And then you look at the breakdown, more than 1 million of those were in those mail-in ballots, and then more than 2 million were those in-person ballots that were cast early. Let's look at the overall big picture here and how it stacks up to the general election. You see here on your screen, around 4 million people voted for the general election compared to the little more than 3 million for the election runoffs today. But if you look at what happened in 2008 with the runoff there, you see how many more people voted for today's election. Back in 2008, 2.14 million compared to more than 3 million for today. There's so much interest in this election today, and it's no surprise why, because of how high the stakes are with the balance of the Senate and the future of Joe Biden's presidency. Wolf?
Pamela, the stakes clearly are enormous. Jake, back to you.
Thanks, Wolf. Joining me now, the top election official in Georgia who defied pressure from President Trump to, quote, find votes in his favor. This is Republican Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger's first CNN interview since his stunning phone call from the president. Secretary Raffensperger, thanks for joining us. Let's talk about the election today. We've seen more than 3 million Georgians vote early and absentee in these two Senate runoffs. There's a couple hours left until polls close. Can you give us a sense of how many Georgians do you think will ultimately have shown up today to vote?
Can't tell right now, Jake. All I can say is we have 2.5 hours left to go. Any voters that are out there that haven't voted yet, we hope to get out there, and I encourage them to get out there before 7 o'clock today. Some places we have good turnout, and other places we have turnouts a little bit light. So we really encourage that we'd have good turnout today.
Do you think that we will be able to project a winner this evening, or might it take a few days?
I think it'll probably take till tomorrow sometime. Really depends on what is the difference in the vote totals, how close the races are. And so as soon as we can get those out to everyone, we know how important this is, not just for Georgia, but for our entire nation.
President-elect Biden won Georgia by fewer than 12,000 votes in November without Trump on the ballot, do you think Republicans will win tonight? Do you think Trump might have hurt their chances by attacking the integrity of the elections and attacking Georgia officials such as yourself and the governor?
Well, it's really tough to say because if you look at Senator Perdue outpolled, John Ossoff by several votes, and he was really in good shape, just not quite enough to get over the 50% hurdle. And yet Kelly Loeffler, she was actually in a jungle primary with about 20 other different voters. So two different races in some respects. So we'll just see how that all plays out.
President Trump was getting out the vote at a rally in your state last night. He said he's going to campaign against your reelection in 2022 because you've been standing up for the truth against his false claims about the election. What's your response to that?
Well, that's 2 years out right now. And today, and for this, I guess, next coming week, our job is to button up this election, get the results out to all the Georgians, and make sure that we can certify this race. So that's my focus right now, not what happens 2 years from now.
Okay. I want to ask you about your phone call on Saturday with President Trump. Take a listen to what he told you in part.
You can't let it happen, and you are letting it happen. I'm notifying you that you're letting it happen. So, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state.
When you heard him say that to you, sir, did you interpret that to mean that the president was telling you to concoct, to invent 11,780 votes for him?
Well, as he talked further, what was pretty obvious to me is that he just has bad data. And we have the numbers on our side, and that's why we had our press conference. We showed that of, I think there was 10,000 dead voters, he said. We had 2. We had no underage voting at all in the state of Georgia. Everyone was 18, during that election. He just has bad data. And when you have good data, you know that you can stand by your results. And our results were accurate.
You also heard in that clip that President Trump said he was, quote, notifying you that, in his view, you were breaking the law by ignoring the false conspiracy theories he was sharing with you. When he said that, did you take that as something of a threat? And do you think President Trump, in that call, may have broken the law?
We already have over 100 investigations going on about that election. President Trump has sued us in multiple jurisdictions. In fact, one of those lawsuits was dismissed earlier today. And so we are standing on the truth. We know that we have followed the law. We have followed the Constitution. And at the end of the day, he will not prevail in a court of law.
But did you think that when he said, I'm notifying you that you're breaking the law, I mean, he is the commander-in-chief. He still has the Justice Department under him. Did you take that as a veiled threat?
Our election is supported by the facts, and he has bad data. And so I'll stand with our facts, and that I'll stand with the results that we've reported and the results that we certified.
You've been standing up for the facts under pressure from President Trump and from lots of lawmakers. How do you explain that pressure that you have faced?
I understand that people are disappointed. For 9 months now, I said that this would be a contentious election, and I understand that we lived in polarized times. Half the people would be happy, half the people would be sad. Little did I know that the race would be so close. And that's where we are right now, that the half that did not win in November, they're very, disappointed. I'm a Republican. I was disappointed also. And I think that the Democrats obviously are happy, and I think they were maybe somewhat surprised because it's the first time the state has voted, and flipped for over 20 years. But the facts are the facts. We followed the law, we followed the Constitution, and those are the accurate results of that election in November.
What do you make of the fact that David Perdue, who's on the ballot today, said that he didn't have any issue with what President Trump did to you on that phone call, said to you on that phone call? He found the release of the tape disgusting, not the actual content of the tape. What do you make of the fact that so many Republicans, including House members from Georgia, are objecting to the electoral votes that Joe Biden won in free and fair elections? Although I should note, none of them are voting. None of them are objecting to their own election on the same ballot on the same day using the same election system. What do you make of all that?
Well, that's a good point, because their election was run with the same system, the same processes, and they won their races. In fact, President Trump got 33,000 less votes in those Republican congressional districts than those Republican congressmen did. He also got 19,000 less votes than Senator David Perdue did in the metro regions. And I stand by the results of what we reported in that election. And they're going to do what they may want to do up in the Washington, D.C. tomorrow. But here in Georgia, we reported the results, we certified them, and I'll stand by our results.
What kind of impact has this had on you and your family? I know that there have been a lot of threats, and I know it's been rather unpleasant. Has it been tough for your wife, for your kids, for your loved ones?
Yeah, it's been tough on the family, obviously. It's really disappointing. I understand that people really care about their causes, and I understand that you may be in the left or the right. But I thought America was always founded on some great ideals like our founders had, and that we'd have our discussions in the halls of Congress, not making threats, death threats, or then going and sending to your wife sexualized, text. What kind of a person does that? That's disgusting.
I know you are a self-described Christian conservative. You are a very conservative Republican. Are you disappointed in how so many members of your party are behaving in terms of their deference to conspiracy theories and to this attempted sedition we're going to see tomorrow, as opposed to just standing up for the transfer of power as we've seen over and over again, whether, Nixon presiding over the Senate and allowing the fact that John F. Kennedy beat him all the way through every election until tomorrow?
I'm just so proud that my dad raised me with those values. He's a World War II veteran, and he just raised me to be truthful, to be honest, and to walk with integrity. And I'm just really grateful for my dad's upbringing, and it's stuck, I guess, at some level in me. And I'm just real grateful for the upbringing I got from my parents.
It looks as though we are going to see tomorrow Republicans objecting to the electoral votes from several states, including Georgia. It looks as though Senator Kelly Loeffler, who's on the ballot today, may in fact take the lead in the Senate on objecting to these votes, these electoral votes that you certified and the Governor Kemp signed. What's your message to them?
We have our results, and our results are accurate. What happens in other states, I can't say, but I know that we followed the process, we followed the law. We did signature match, not just for the envelopes that came in with the ballot attached, but also we did it during the application phase. Then we stood up an online portal, and this runoff right now, over 70% of the people that have gotten their absentee ballots use photo ID. We have a verifiable paper ballot trail, so we could do 100% recount. And the recount showed that the machines didn't flip votes, so the vote is accurate, and it also verified the results of November 3rd.
Should people feel confident? Should Georgians feel confident about the integrity of today's election?
Absolutely. We have never had an election that has been more secure with more integrity. And I would encourage every Georgian, if you haven't voted yet, put away all this negative stuff that'll just keep you away from the polls and get out to vote. We have 2.5 hours left to go. Please get out to vote.
What's your message to President Trump?
I think we've had our conversation. I want to talk to Georgians. Please get out to vote. Polls close at 7 o'clock.
All right. Secretary of State Raffensperger, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your integrity, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
A remarkably restrained Secretary Raffensperger. I can't say that I would be so restrained were I in his shoes, but I mean, you saw him not. Honestly, David Perdue, who's on the ballot today, called the release of the tape disgusting, and not President Trump shaking down Georgia election officials disgusting. It's like attacking a closed-circuit camera instead of the bank robbers.
Right. What's really striking to me about that interview is that you hear him. This is a conservative Republican in a conservative state.
Very conservative,
in a very
by the way.
State, talking about a state in which, frankly, they have pretty strict rules for voting in the state of Georgia. He talked about voter ID. There are accusations from Democrats that they've been purging voters from the rolls. So this is not some kind of loosey-goosey liberal state.
Stacey Abrams hates him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But what President Trump has done for people like Brad Raffensperger is make him into some kind of centrist figure in which he's sort of just defending the basic, Georgia has strict voting rules. They enforce those strict voting rules, but it's not good enough for a president who wants to just find 11,000 votes out of thin air, effectively. And that's what has put him in that position that I think is just really remarkable, considering that Democrats are still out there saying, hey, Georgia still has these tough election rules that should not be on the books, that make it harder for people to vote.
That's exactly right. And all of that is understandably kind of, under the radar right now, because the president of the United States, what he should be doing is taking credit for everything that he's gotten done during the 4 years he's been in office and everything else. But he's so obsessed with this. And what you were both just saying about how conservative a Republican he is, it's a reminder that this has nothing to do with ideology. This has nothing to do with where you stand on the political spectrum. This has everything to do with where you stand on the fealty to Donald Trump spectrum. And either you are completely loyal to him, which is almost never a two-way street, it's always a one-way street, or you are loyal to the Constitution. And a lot of people who are now coming out in the Senate who are saying that they're being loyal to the Constitution, they spent a lot of the past 4 years ignoring some pretty outrageous stuff that President Trump did. Now, at the end, some of them are saying, okay, but what he is doing isn't because he's a conservative Republican or anything else. It's because he's an American.
We've said this before. President Trump has spent the last 4 or 5 years, maybe even longer, making facts and truth and decency into partisan issues. And Secretary Raffensperger there, just standing up for facts and truth and getting attacked. I mean, Rudy Giuliani called the governor of Arizona, a very conservative Republican, called him a Democrat. Again, facts, truth, decency, these are not partisan issues. We're counting down to the first results from the Georgia exit polls and early hints about the outcome of tonight's historic double Senate runoff. We have much more ahead. Stay with us.
We'll get back to the Georgia Senate runoff election in a moment. First, another major story that we are following, the worsening pandemic and growing issues with the vaccine rollout. Moments ago, the CDC released new numbers showing fewer than 29% of distributed doses have actually been administered. And it comes amid a dire situation that is only getting worse in California. CNN's Erica Hill joins us now with more. Erica, so one healthcare official says Southern California is facing what they called a human disaster.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There is so much focus on California right now, Anderson, because there's a concern that what we're seeing in California could be seen in other states soon. And if we look specifically at Southern California, a massive region in the state, 0% ICU capacity. And what we're seeing is that people with non-COVID related issues, a heart attack, for example, well, now hospitals are being told, ambulance crews are being told that they essentially have to ration care because the number of COVID patients is so high.
This is the peak, and then the next couple of weeks we're going to get more. I think we're going to be in some trouble.
Amid surging hospitalizations, an unimaginable directive for ambulance crews in Los Angeles County: don't transport patients with little chance of survival, and only administer supplemental oxygen to patients with oxygen saturation below 90%.
This is the catastrophic situation that we had hoped to avoid.
For those lucky enough to be brought in,
we're waiting 2, 3, 4 hours minimum.
It's not just Southern California in crisis. Nationwide, COVID-19 hospitalizations have never been higher.
So we have to be prepared for that, the potential for rapid change.
In Arizona, just 8% of ICU beds are available. It's among the 41 states showing a rise in new cases over the past week. Not a single one posting a decline.
We do strongly anticipate another surge following the holidays.
One thing that is down: testing, a slide that began in mid-December. Meantime, issues and questions persist about the vaccine rollout. Just 28% of the more than 17 million doses that were distributed have been administered.
And if we don't fix this, the numbers of Americans who will lose their lives could come close to 1 million by the fall. It's that bad. So we've got to make this work.
New York's mayor hoping to set up mass vaccination sites for his city, but
we don't know when we're getting future shipments. We can't plan.
He's written to Vice President Mike Pence asking for help. In Florida, seniors camping out in their cars overnight as temperatures dipped into the 40s.
I want to be able to see my kids and my grandchildren. That means a lot.
Look, we're seeing cases rise across the country, and there's more concern about this new variant that was first identified in the UK. It has now been identified in Georgia, found in an 18-year-old man. We're told that young man is now isolating. He did not have a history of travel, Anderson, nor did the 60-year-old man who was found to have that variant here in New York State.
Eric, I appreciate that. Joining me now is CNN Chief Medical Correspondent Dr. Sanjay Gupta. Sanjay, I mean, this is really just stunning and alarming. I want to start, first of all, the news out of Los Angeles. Was the disaster we're seeing in California, was that inevitable? I mean, I don't understand things like oxygen, being in short supply just seems nuts.
Yeah, no, I mean, no question. And we're certainly not used to this, in this country, Anderson, a wealthy country with lots of resources. You and I have traveled around the world where they do have to constantly triage these sorts of resources. But, none of this was inevitable. I mean, it depends how far back you want to go, Anderson. But I will say that the idea of declaring these internal disasters now within hospital systems, we're seeing that in many parts of the country. The idea of turning, public buildings, even churches and things like that into triage centers, we're seeing that in various parts of the country. So it was isolated, earlier last year, but now, the entire country is on fire. One person dying every 15 minutes in California. It's basically one person every 33 seconds in the country right now dying of COVID. So it's a dire situation. Our hospital system was not built for this kind of surge capacity. That's why I think there's a lot of struggles right now.
And I mean, the federal government, the administration certainly just seems AWOL on this. I mean, they've just seemed to have washed their hands of the whole thing. Certainly the president has. Dr. Fauci said today it's highly unlikely the coronavirus vaccines would be federally mandated. What's the problem with the rollout of this? I mean, this was supposed to be the thing that the administration was, the president kept talking about the military is going to be involved. It's going to be incredibly quick. It's going to happen fast. They're falling by all their own metrics.
Yeah, I mean, this is a constant note that we're hitting again. The idea that they get part way through something and then all of a sudden the attention, the focus, the drive to get it done sort of goes away. So the vaccines, as you point out, it's remarkable the fact that we have 2 authorized vaccines in this country, but vaccines aren't really what make the difference. The vaccinations are, and the states have been sort of left to handle this. In our reporting, Anderson, we found that the Association of States and Territories, they asked for close to $8.4 billion to help create the infrastructure for this and other things. They got closer to $480 million. The right number probably is somewhere in between, but the point is that there's a huge delta between what the states thought they would need, or what the states say they would need to get this done and what they actually received. So it's very sketchy. It's very patchwork. You could be in 2 different counties in the same state and have a very different experience in terms of actually getting the vaccine. And that's the problem of not having a national strategy.
Yeah, Sanjay, appreciate it. Coming up, first exit polls of voters in the Georgia Senate runoffs. We could get hints about which party has the advantage tonight. That is just minutes away.
Control of the United States Senate is on the line right now as voters in Georgia have their say in 2 high-stakes runoffs. We're live here in Washington and in Atlanta. You're looking at live pictures from Atlanta right now. Other cities across Georgia on this election night in America continued. We want to welcome our viewers here in the United States and around the world. I'm Wolf Blitzer in the CNN Election Center. We're counting down to the end of voting in Georgia about 2 hours from now. And we're just moments away from revealing the first results from our exit polls. Georgians are choosing between Democratic pastor Raphael Warnock and GOP Senator and businesswoman Kelly Loeffler. The other race pits Democrat and former journalist Jon Ossoff against Republican incumbent and former Reebok CEO David Perdue. Democrats need to win both seats to win control of the U.S. Senate. That would give them a clean sweep of the White House and both chambers of Congress as the Biden presidency begins. Republicans need to win only one of the Georgia seats to keep control of the Senate. That would allow Mitch McConnell and the GOP to hang on to a base of power here in Washington. As we count down to the first results, let's go back to Jake.
Wolf, voters in cities and towns and small coves all around Georgia, from Peachtree Avenue all the way to Peachtree Road, have the singular opportunity to shape the balance of power here in the nation's capital. Let's go to our correspondents following the campaigns. CNN's Kyung La is in Atlanta. Kyung, what are the Democratic candidates doing in these final hours?
Well, they're looking at the clock. They're seeing the window close, and I'm told by both of their campaigns that they are using every available minute to get their voters out. Watching that clock again, we are hearing from the Warnock campaign. A senior aide says that he has been doing what they are characterizing as, quote, marathon call-ins. He is specifically targeting Black radio, gospel radio, local TV interviews, trying to reach anyone, those eyes and ears to the polls. He's focusing on the markets of Atlanta, Albany, Columbus, Macon, Savannah, and Augusta. As far as the Ossoff campaign, he is in the middle right now of 25 local media interviews. Again, Black radio, local TV as well. And they also were able to push out 1.5 million direct calls from the campaign to voters, trying to get them to the polls. This sort of direct contact is where the Ossoff campaign has focused their resources. They say they were outspent on television, but they believe this will pay off in direct voter outreach. As far as where the two candidates will be tonight, Jake, even though they've run this coordinated campaign, they will be in two separate locations watching the returns after the polls close. Their campaigns also have separate war rooms as they look at what is going to be unfolding tonight, Jake.
All right, Kyung La with the Democrats. Thanks so much. Now let's go to Ryan Nobles, who's at the Republican candidates' headquarters. Ryan, what are you learning?
Well, Jake, Election Day is always important if you're a political candidate, but in this era of early voting, it becomes less and less important. That's not the case for the Republicans here in Georgia. While voters have been casting ballots for more than 2 weeks in the state, the Democrats had much more success in turning out their voters during that early voting period. That means that Republicans needed their voters to come out in big numbers here on Election Day, and that's traditionally the way Republicans prefer to vote, in person and on Election Day. And we're told that in a briefing from Karl Rove, who is the head of the Battleground Georgia Fund. This is a fundraising organization that helped to funnel money into the state, that they're targeting 1 million total votes cast on Election Day as the target that they need to reach in order to be successful today. They feel confident, according to their models, that they're going to be able to reach that number. But before the returns come in, and they don't exactly see who's voted for whom, they feel if there are 1 million votes cast total, that is a good sign for Republicans as they hope to hold on to these two seats and control of the United States Senate. Jake.
All right, Ryan, thank you so much. Now let's go to David Chalian, who has the first exit polls. David, what are you learning?
Well, Jake, given all the controversy we've seen in the last couple of days, we asked Georgia voters in this runoff election, do they think that the 2020 presidential election in Georgia was conducted fairly? A majority of voters in these Georgia runoffs, 56%, say yes. The 2020 presidential election in Georgia was conducted fairly. 41% say no. But, Jake, there is a partisan split there. 93% of Democrats say it was fair. 76% of Republicans say it wasn't. Obviously, a big partisan divide. We also asked about how people felt in terms of confidence level that their votes in this election today in the runoffs will be counted accurately. 42% of the voters in Georgia are very confident. 31% somewhat confident. Add those together, 73%, nearly 3/4 of voters in these runoffs have confidence that their votes are going to be counted, tabulated, and totaled up accurately, Jake.
All right, David Chalian, interesting stuff. And Abby, I mean, that's unbelievable, the partisan divide there about whether or not the presidential election was conducted in a fair way, which, by the way, all the top Republican election officials in the state say it was. 93% of Democrats say it was fair. 76% of Republicans in Georgia say it was unfair.
And it's somewhat of a reversal from what things were like just before the November election, when you were probably more likely to find Democrats who said they had concerns about the fairness of Georgia elections. As we were discussing earlier, Democrats have a lot of concerns about Georgia being a state where it is more difficult than it should be, in their view, for people to vote. But now the president has turned Republicans against itself, frankly. They are being cannibalized by this myth that somehow there was rampant fraud that no one can find, and that it's so pervasive that everything is in question. I do think it's a good sign for Republicans that the people who did show up still believe in the system. It means that they're probably getting their most diehard supporters out to vote. And that's probably a good sign for them. That's what they want. They want the people who they really can count on, who are going to show up today in person to kind of counterbalance a Democratic advantage in the early vote.
Or they at least believe enough in the system. Right. I mean, talk about a mixed message. I mean, you have the president, never mind for weeks, but in particular last night, going to Georgia to give the final push, to go to a very specific northern part of the state where I'm told Republicans were, it's Republican country, but Republicans were a little bit worried that the turnout wasn't as high as it should be in early voting. And certainly they were worried about the numbers and the data that they were doing internally. That's why he went there. And yes, he said, go out and vote. And yes, he said, vote for these two. But then at the same time, he talked about how the election was rigged and so on and so forth. So if you're a Republican voter who believes in what they're hearing, the lies that they're hearing, and believes in Donald Trump, but wants to vote for these senators, I mean, how do you go there and cast this vote without being completely conflicted and frankly confused by the messages you're hearing from your leaders?
One of the most bizarre situations I've ever seen in politics. One of the top election officials from the state of Georgia coming out yesterday and giving a press conference rebutting point by point, Wolf, all of the nuttery that Donald Trump, outgoing President Trump, had cited on that call with Secretary of State Raffensperger, including the idea that Raffensperger doesn't have a brother who works for a Chinese tech company. He doesn't exist. Wolf?
Yeah, all that stuff, so, as you say, so bizarre and crazy. John, the demographics of Georgia over the years, you've covered politics a long time, so have I. They've clearly changed. That's one of the reasons why Biden won the state a few weeks ago.
Yes, that is why. Numbers, math, changes in registration, participation. The president, nuttery, Jake's word, is a good term. Let's just look. This is the presidential map. We're counting Senate races tonight, but as you noted, Georgia flipped, Arizona flipped. Those were the big flips. Not since 1992, not since 1996, and a Democrat carried those states for president. Some of that is anti-Trump animus. The president is unpopular, even with moderate Republicans, particularly in the suburbs. But let's zoom in on Georgia, Wolf, and talk about what you just talked about. The state is changing. It's a Sun Belt state. The population is shifting in a lot of ways. Let's look at some of them. And as you go through them, here's one. This is happening all across America. And you see this. Now, let me explain this to you. The lighter you see this, that means the population is going down. Where you see it's a little darker, that means the population is going up. So what do you see? Generalizing a bit, but the population is shrinking in these smaller rural areas. More people are moving closer to the cities, the suburbs, and the exurbs. Over time, in most places, not everywhere, but in most places in America, over time, that benefits the Democrats. People who live closer to the city, the close-in suburbs, more and more over the last 20 years, especially the last few years, voting Democratic. So some of it is general population shifts away from rural areas to the cities and the suburbs. That's what's happening. But another thing you see happening in Georgia here is look at the registration of black voters from 2016, when President Trump carried the state quite handily, to 2020, where he lost quite narrowly. The lighter colors are declining in black registration. The green is the growth. And you see some deep green up here, but you see a lot of green in the Savannah area over here, in the Atlanta area in the suburbs that was the bedrock of Joe Biden's narrow victory. So you see this has been a concerted effort by Georgia Democrats, especially Stacey Abrams and others. This has been 2016 to 2020. One of the tests tonight, Wolf, is Democrats say that even since the November election, they've registered tens of thousands of new voters, African Americans and young voters. So we'll see how that turns out. But you see these demographic shifts here, especially up in the Atlanta area. More black voters registered, they tend to vote Democratic. Here's another thing to keep an eye on if these elections are very close. Remember Andrew Yang, the former Democratic presidential candidate, CNN commentator. He went down to Georgia for a little bit to try to register Asian American voters in the state. Very tiny slice of the population, but in close elections, that can matter. And look, you see the purple colors, the deeper the purple, the more registration you do see. Over the last 4 years, down here, Chatham County, Savannah area and around there, and especially up here in the Atlanta metro area in the suburbs, you do see some increase in Asian American voters. So that is a key question. It's a small voting population, but in a close election, a couple hundred here, a couple thousand there can help. So you come back out to the map and you look at it this way. Again, Joe Biden won the state by just shy of 12,000 votes, a perfect storm, if you will, for the Democrats. Georgia is trending toward the Democrats. Call it a purple state, if you will, but it still leans red. That's the challenge tonight. Can Democrats recreate this with new voters, motivating people to turn out, or is Georgia still in a traditional race without Trump on the ballot? Does it go back to it's still what I would call slightly Republican-leaning DNA? That's the test.
Yeah, and at stake right now, it's a huge stake, the balance of power in the U.S. Senate. Remind us a little bit about how significant what's happening in these two Senate runoffs will be here in Washington for the incoming Biden administration.
Let me come over a little closer to you. Here's where we are right now as Congress comes in tomorrow. 50 Republican senators. We know that's done. 48 Democratic senators. That includes 2 independents who caucus with the Democrats. So it's 50 to 48. The only 2 left to be decided are these 2 races in Georgia. So does Joe Biden have control of the Senate floor? Is it Chuck Schumer deciding which committees hold which hearings? Well, for that to happen, Jon Ossoff has to win and Pastor Warnock has to win. That would get you to 50-50. Democrats need them both. 50-50 means soon-to-be Vice President Kamala Harris would break the ties. Wouldn't be easy. Democrats would still be the narrowest of Senate majorities. But Chuck Schumer controlling the Senate, the Democrats having the committee chairs, is a whole different world for Joe Biden and his agenda than Mitch McConnell and the Republicans. Again, Democrats need to win them both tonight. If Republicans win just one of the 2, that means Mitch McConnell keeps control.
Whoever's the majority leader in the U.S. Senate, and you know the rules as well as I do, they control what comes up for a vote and what doesn't necessarily come up for a vote. A lot of power that Senate majority leader has. That's why this is so important. We're watching all of this unfold. We're standing by. We anticipate more exit poll results coming in the 2 Georgia Senate runoffs. We're waiting also for the first results. That's coming up fairly soon. We're diving deeper on the issues, the driving issues. We'll be right back. Check it out. Take a look at these pictures from Georgia right now. A long line of voters in Cherokee County, not far from Atlanta. You're looking at live pictures right now in the last rush to cast ballots in the 2 Senate runoffs. We're awaiting the first results. The voting ends less than 2 hours from now. Let's go over to David Chalian, who's looking at the exit poll results here at the CNN Battleground desk. Give us some more information, what we're learning from these exit polls.
Well, Wolf, we're taking a look at the makeup of the electorate and how it compares to the November general election. So let's go through some demographics. On gender, take a look. The electorate in these runoffs, 54% female, 46% male. That is a little more male than it was in November, but so slightly, well within any kind of margins here. It looks very similar to November. We see a similar thing on race. Take a look at how it breaks down on race in these runoffs. 62% of the electorate in Georgia is white, 29% black. That is almost identical to what we saw in November. 5% Latino, 2% Asian, and 2% other racial or ethnic groups. Age is one place where we actually see a little bit of difference from November, but I want to remind you, these are early exit polls. These numbers are going to change throughout the night as more interviews come in. But as of these early preliminary data, take a look here. Only 13% of this electorate is 18 to 29 years old. In November, that number was 20%. And at the other end, 65 years old or older, a quarter of the electorate today is 65 or older. But back in November, that was down at 19%. So this is an older electorate, which probably is giving some comfort to Republicans looking at the makeup of the electorate. And then finally, just party ID. How do you identify? Democrat, Republican, Independent, very similar to a spread that we saw in November. This time around, it's 39% Republican. That was 38% in November, 36% Democrat, and 25% Independent, just a tiny hair less independent than it was in November. But again, this looks remarkably similar to the electorate in November when David Perdue bested Jon Ossoff by 88,000 votes, Wolf.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm always anxious to see more younger people vote, older people vote in bigger numbers than younger people. That's not necessarily good. Younger people should vote. Anderson.
Well, thanks very much. David Axelrod, what do you look when you see these numbers?
Well, first of all, let me just say that if there's one thing that we've learned, it's humility when it comes to these things. So I don't take too much from it.
Right.
But if I were a Republican, I would be comforted by some of these numbers, particularly the age skew.
Right.
They tend to do better with older voters. There is a drop-off among younger voters. That would be disappointing to Democrats. But look, this is a closely divided state, and this is going to be a close election.
I mean, historically, I was talking to Harry Enton earlier, historically, Republicans have done well in runoffs in Georgia.
They've won 8 out of 8 since 1992.
Pretty well.
So, you know, there's reason for Republicans going in to feel some confidence, but the state has changed, and it's really a matter of who, you know, the wrench in this whole deal has been thrown in by the president, and all the uncertainty that he's created and the kind of civil war he's touched off between Republicans in Georgia, and you know, his ambivalence and this notion that maybe the system isn't kosher and not worth participating in is important. And one of the questions here is, you know, Donald Trump has proven that he can bring Republicans out when he's on the ballot. He's not on the ballot here. And is there a drop-off simply because, you know, those who are for Trump and not necessarily that enthused about Republicans just don't turn out?
And are some people just turned off by the whole thing, by all the ads, by the, you know, the
$500 billion in ads.
Right, and $500 million in ads. But you do have more than 3 million people who voted early, which is really kind of remarkable. Yeah. It's just remarkable. But the people who voted are confident that their votes are going to be counted accurately when you look at these numbers. Very confident, 42%, somewhat confident, 31%. So despite what the president has said about Georgia's inability to count votes, which of course hurts these candidates, these Republican candidates, despite all of that, these people have voted and said, I think that my vote is going to get
Although a quarter of them say not very confident, not at all confident. I mean,
well, then you have to ask that question, did the other people stay home?
Right.
Because they had no confidence
That's the
at all.
question.
They had no confidence.
Yeah, look, for me, underneath all this math is a real movement. The fact that we're sitting here tonight talking about Georgia in a runoff with the idea that perhaps Democrats could win is a testament to a people's movement that we sometimes don't talk enough about. It's not just about Donald Trump. It's not just about these candidates. You have people like Stacey Abrams, Black Lives Matter, Fair Fight, New Georgia Coalition, and others who, when nobody was paying attention, were out there knocking on doors in the middle of COVID. They've come up with strategies to make these numbers work, including, you know, using food, using music, culture. Something is happening here. And if they don't get it tonight, they're going to get it. And what you're seeing is history in the making, no matter who wins tonight, history in the making. So underneath this math is a people's movement. I think that people have a lot of reason to be proud of. I'm not going to say who's going to win or lose like you. I have now learned to be humble in the face of this stuff, but I know that no matter who wins or loses tonight, you got a lot of people that should be proud tonight in Georgia.
I'd say two other things. Some would agree with you that there's been a great effort on the part of Democrats to turn Georgia. But the reality is demographics have changed. Georgia is a big growing state, and the folks that are coming and growing there are not generally going to be voting Republican. And so that's number one. Number two, and this is something that it's sort of remarkable sitting here as a Republican to have to sort of talk about this, which is money. I mean, the Democratic Party is now, and I think will be for the foreseeable future, the party of money. They are going to have, and they did in this election, they outspent Republicans in the state 2-1. And I have friends in Georgia, friends in South Carolina who get Georgia TV, and they say it's just overwhelming how much the Democrats are on TV, overwhelming how much they're spending on getting their vote out. So the Democrats, and Van and I had been talking about this, the Democrats are now the money, have the big tech money, the Zuckerbergs and all the big money, and it's a coalition of the very rich and the poor. That's right. And it's a very strange coalition, and Republicans are sort of overwhelmed by all this.
And both are giving. What's interesting is the grassroots folks that are giving.
Yes, I agree with that.
And then you also have
the Bernie Bros.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
But some of that money has been used to been weaponized against Democrats by Republicans in some of these states and in some of these districts. by emphasizing the out-of-state nature of them. You know, these are liberals from California trying to elect our...
Rather have the money.
You shouldn't lose in this whole discussion. You know, you said if it's not tonight, it'll be another night. But tonight, it's going to determine a lot about what the Biden presidency is going to be.
For the next 4 years, at the very least. There isn't a lot of time left for Georgia voters to cast their ballots and decide control of the U.S. Senate. We are awaiting the first results and new details from our exit polls. We'll be right back.
It's all about Georgia right now as we count down to the first results in this truly high-stakes double runoff that will decide control of the United States Senate. Let's walk over to Pamela Brown over at the CNN voting desk. You're looking closely. A lot of people voted early, and a lot of people are voting today.
Yeah, and the clock is kicking down to 7 p.m. Eastern time, Wolf. That is when the polls close in Georgia, and that is when all the mail-in ballots have to be in by, with the exception of those military and provisional ballots. And if you look at the numbers, as of yesterday, there were still 368,404 outstanding absentee ballots. Now, we don't know whether some people received their ballots and decided to go vote in person instead. We don't have the answer to that, but what we are focused on is the Atlanta metro area, the Democratic stronghold, Fulton County, which is the home to Atlanta, and what's going on there. If you look on your screen, the early in-person voting comprised of 271,000 mail-in ballots. As you see there, nearly 100,000. We're also looking at the Democratic trending Cobb County. This is all part of the Atlanta region, the surrounding suburbs there. The absentee ballots issued 146,885. So far returned 108,563. Democrats there are focused on these areas, on turnout, getting the vote out in these Democratic areas. Wolf, one Cobb County official CNN recently spoke with said not to expect the first wave of results there in Cobb County until 8 p.m. Eastern. Wolf?
We'll be watching every step of the way, Pamela. Thank you. Let's go to Georgia right now. Some of our correspondents are there on the ground. They're watching all of this very closely. CNN's Amara Walker is in Atlanta for us right now. So what are you seeing, Amara, from your vantage point?
Well, we just got an update from Gabriel Sterling, the voting implementation systems manager, and he said, look, voting has been light, it's been steady, things have been going quite smoothly, but he said it's not necessarily an indication of low voter turnout. In fact, it just might mean that poll workers have become more efficient, and of course, the ballot this time around is shorter than what we saw on November 3rd. As for election day turnout, he says he hopes to see between 600,000 to 1.1 million people turn out today to vote for the Senate runoff. It'll take a couple of days, he says, to know the final results of the election, and the first flood of the results should come in between 7:30 and 9 o'clock tonight, and that is because the absentee ballots are allowed to be processed 15 days before the election, county by county. One thing to keep in mind, however, Gabriel Sterling mentioned this. He said, look, there are 17,000 outstanding ballots from the military and from people overseas that have until Friday to come in. So if we're talking about two or one close race here, those ballots could make the difference come Friday. Wolf?
Every vote counts. Amara, stand by. I want to go to CNN's Nick Valencia. He's joining us from Decatur, Georgia right now. So what are you seeing over there? I know a lot of people are really anxious in these final minutes to vote.
That's right, Wolf. A significant development here just in the last few minutes in DeKalb County. We just got on the phone with the spokeswoman who tells us that DeKalb County has now surpassed all of the in-person voting that it saw during the general election in November. As of 5:22, there's been 51,000 people that have voted in person in DeKalb County, and that's with 90 minutes left to go, or just about 90 minutes till the polls close. In November, Wolf, that was 47,561. So already about 3,000 more have voted in DeKalb County. Why is that important? Because if you remember, DeKalb County and Fulton County, which encompasses Metro Atlanta, was huge in giving a decided victory here for Joe Biden, turning the state blue. The spokeswoman also tells us that they've caught up with absentee ballots so far. That should be sent over to the Secretary of State about 7:01 as soon as polls close. And they say the voting has been pretty scattered equally across the precincts. Some have seen as much as 600 people coming out to vote. Some precincts as small as 90 people have gone out to vote. But a lot is riding deciding on the line tonight. Polls close at 7 p.m. Eastern. Wolf.
Yep, they will be closing very soon. Nick, stand by very much. I want to go over to David Chalian, who's watching all of this very closely. David Chalian, you're getting some more exit poll results.
Yeah, again, preliminary exit polls. These numbers will change throughout the night. But one of the things that we were asking about is the importance of containing the coronavirus. Take a look here, and you will see which is more important to do now. 52% of the electorate in Georgia said containing coronavirus is more important than the 42% that said rebuilding the economy. That's even, it's about what it was in November, but a slight bit more saying containing coronavirus is more important. Has the coronavirus pandemic caused you financial hardship? This is where you see why Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue backed Donald Trump's push for those $2,000 stimulus checks. Take a look here. 15% have experienced severe financial hardship. Add that to the 39% who say they've had moderate financial hardship. That's a majority of the Georgia voters in these runoffs saying that they're experiencing economic pain due to the coronavirus pandemic. 44% say no financial hardship at all. And then with the growing cases of COVID that are out there, we asked, how concerned are you that people, your members of your family, will contract coronavirus? Look at that. Nearly 2/3 of the electorate in these runoffs, 68%, are very or somewhat worried that they or a family member will contract coronavirus, compared to 31% not too worried, not at all worried. Wolf.
Yeah, well, everybody should be worried. This is a deadly virus. You know, John King, give us a sense of the climate in Georgia. People are voting right now, but hovering over everything is this coronavirus pandemic.
It is. Look, we're here on election night, right? So normally we talk about red and blue. I just want to put this up. The deeper the red here, that's the higher the rate of COVID in these counties across America. And let's just go to the state of Georgia as we look at this and look at all this red. I mean, COVID is everywhere. It is across America. We're in the middle right now of the fall into the winter peak and the surge. But just look at all this red and look especially where it is. It is everywhere in Georgia, which was at the forefront of the reopening debate. Governor Kemp siding with President Trump back then. They're rivals right now, you might say, in some ways, and reopening early. But look in rural Georgia, the deepest red a lot in Trump country. That's why you see those numbers so hard. Everybody is being hit by this. Everybody is seeing either the personal health care effect or the economic effect of this, because as the months have gone on, COVID is everywhere. And again, it's changing how people are voting. That's why we're seeing all these mail-in ballots. That's why we're seeing in-person early voting. And Wolf, right now, again, Georgia is going through what the entire country is going through. This is hospitalizations. Let me stretch this out a little bit. Remember, early on, then the summer, we thought the summer surge was horrific, right? Georgia, Florida, Arizona, California, the South was a lot of it. We thought that was horrific. Look at this hospitalizations. Monday, more than 5,500 Georgians hospitalized with COVID-19. And look at the trend lines. They keep going up. That's hospitalizations. Let me move that over here. And again, as people vote today, as they think about what do they want in Washington? Do they want Joe Biden to have a Democratic Senate so that he can get more done? Do they want the Republicans here to put a bridge on Joe Biden? One of the factors is this. This is just happening. This is not normally what we would think of as a political issue, but it just is. Look at the rising case count here, and let me stretch it out so you can get a better look at it. Again, Georgia largely spared back in March when we went through this. Then the summer surge that we thought was horrific, including in Georgia. Just look at this, 8,000 cases. 8,000 cases plus on average every day. So as people vote today, as they think about what they want in Washington, let me just flip these away and look at this. Georgia, like everywhere in America, well, forget red and blue. This pain is everywhere. Democrat, Republican, rural, suburban, exurban. It's horrific.
Yeah, I suspect some people didn't want to vote in person today because they didn't want to go in those lines, especially older voters out there. John, stand by. The final push to turn out the vote in Georgia is underway right now before the polls close in the crucial Senate runoffs. We're going to talk live with the Democrat and voting rights activist Stacey Abrams. That's just ahead. Check out this beautiful picture of the United States Capitol right now. Control of the United States Senate right now is in the hands of Georgia voters. We're back with our special coverage. We're learning more from our exit polls as we get closer and closer to the end of voting and the first results. Let's go over to David Chalian. He's getting some more results from our exit polls. What else are you learning?
We're doing a deep dive here into voters in the Warnock-Loeffler race, Wolf, and you just will not believe what different political universes we are living in these days. And I think it explains what you'll see take place on Capitol Hill tomorrow. We asked, was the 2020 presidential election in Georgia conducted fairly? Among Loeffler voters in this runoff, 77% of Loeffler voters say no. the 2020 election was not conducted fairly. That's why you heard her last night at the Trump rally saying she's going to support opposing the Electoral College count tomorrow in Congress. Only 20% of her voters say yes. Compare that with Raphael Warnock's voters. It's a totally different picture. 92% of Warnock voters in this runoff race say yes, the 2020 presidential election in Georgia that Joe Biden won was conducted fairly. Only 6% say no. What about this election? How do they feel about the votes being counted in the runoff? Among Loeffler voters, it's an even split. 50% of her voters are very or somewhat confident their votes will be counted accurately. But the other half of her own voters are not at all confident, not very confident, or not at all. Warnock's voters, it's a different story. They have confidence in the system. 96% say they are confident, very or somewhat, that their votes will be tallied up accurately in this election today, Wolf.
Two very, very different universes indeed. All right, let's go back to Jake.
No, good. Wolf, thanks so much. Right now, we have new reporting from our correspondents covering President-elect Biden and President Trump. First, let's go to Arlette Saenz. The president-elect is following the Georgia vote tonight. Arlette, what are you learning?
Well, Jake, President-elect Biden's team is feeling optimistic about these Senate runoffs, with a source close to the transition telling me they feel like the Democrats have a good shot of winning. And this source acknowledged that a win from the Democrats would certainly ease the path to Biden achieving the agenda that he has talked about throughout the campaign. But they also said that much of what they are planning to do will require bipartisan pushes. Even if Democrats were to win, that this would be a razor-thin majority for them. So they are expecting that they will need to work with Republicans either way. Both Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris traveled down to the state in the last 48 hours, trying to show how much importance they're placing on this race.
All right, Arlette Saenz covering the Biden campaign. Thanks so much. Let's go to our White House correspondent, Caitlin Collins. Now, Caitlin, what are you hearing about President Trump's relationship with Georgia Senator Kelly Loeffler, who's on the ballot today?
Well, it's been a little troubled at times because, remember, of course, she is someone the president associates with Brian Kemp, the governor that he promised to primary last night, because Kemp has refused to do the president's bidding on the election. But, Jake, we're also learning more just about their direct relationship, because after on Sunday, when Kelly Loeffler was doing a Sunday show, she was asked if she was going to object to the certification of these votes on Capitol Hill tomorrow, and she wouldn't say. She was asked multiple times. She deferred. She just said that she was taking it very seriously, but she did not say yes, that she was going to come out and support this effort, as you were seeing Senate Republicans weigh their options. And, Jake, we're told that the president was unhappy with that reaction, that he was displeased. She would not say yes, she was going to support it. He made that pretty clear. And, Jake, you noticed last night at that rally the president held in Georgia, I was there, he invited Kelly Loeffler on stage. The first thing that came out of her mouth when she was up there, Jake, was that she is going to vote against certifying those results tomorrow when they meet on Capitol Hill. Yeah, the supplication must be 100%. Absolutely. Caitlin Collins, thanks so much. Joining us now, one of the most prominent Democrats in Georgia, former gubernatorial candidate and voting rights activist, Stacey Abrams. Leader Abrams, thanks so much for joining us. In the last hour, the Georgia Secretary of State told me that his office is seeing good turnout in some parts of Georgia, lighter turnout in others. What are you hearing? What have you seen? And what might it mean for the Democrats' chances today?
Well, we went into this election with a pretty strong, healthy margin, but, steady turnout across the state has signaled that people are interested. We haven't seen the deluge, but it's just now we're just into the rush hour time when we have more voters who are going to be coming to vote after work. So I don't think we can prognosticate what's happening, but we do see a very steady flow of voters on both sides of the aisle, which I think means it's going to be a tight race.
You obviously are very dedicated to the idea of voter access, fighting voter suppression. Have you seen anything today raising your concerns?
No, I mean, we had a few challenges where voters were told that they'd already voted because of absentee ballots. Luckily, we've been very diligent about ensuring that people know their rights. They've been calling into the hotlines, getting information. We've let folks know that if they go to the wrong precinct because of the nature of the races, they should ask for a provisional ballot. And so a lot of it is, we think people understand the importance of the race, but they also understand they've got support to make certain their votes count. And Fair Fight has been working very closely with a number of organizations across the state to ensure that every voter understands their power.
So as of right now, you feel confident that this is a fair and legitimate election based on what you've seen as of right now?
I do. I think we continue to make progress. Now, let's be clear. We have not fully eliminated voter suppression in Georgia or across the country, but we have made dramatic strides from even June and certainly from 2018. The fact that absentee ballots can be cured, the fact that people know that they have the right to provisional ballots, but they're not getting them as a perfunctory exchange when there's a challenge. The fact that voters have a belief that they have the right to be heard across the state, especially in our smaller enclaves outside of Metro Atlanta. All of these are really good signals, but we have more work to do, and especially paying attention to the chatter coming from the Republicans of their intent to start to restrict the rights of voters because they're concerned that so many people are engaged and so many people are turning out. And hopefully Democrats and Republicans can come together and say that voter access in Georgia is a good thing, that high turnout is a good thing, and we will not put new barriers in place or take away opportunities to hear from every single eligible citizen.
It's Dana Bash in Washington. Thank you so much for doing this. I want to ask about what we saw in November, which is obviously President Trump lost, but Democrats also lost seats in the House, didn't pick up the seats that they thought that they would in November in the United States Senate. What are you looking for tonight to see if Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock will buck that trend?
Well, I think it's important to look state by state. And we know that for many Democrats and for many campaigns across the country, Democrats prioritize people's lives over politics, and they took very dramatic steps to curtail the likelihood of increasing the surge in COVID. This time, because we had good information and we knew what we could do, we saw many more boots on the ground. We saw incredible investment. Fair Fight was able to distribute more than $25 million to smaller organizations to help them with their work, and we've been doing this work. It's a multi-generational, multi-ethnic, multi-county effort where we are everywhere doing everything, and I think that's the signal we need to watch. In 2008, the high water mark for Senate runoffs were hit. That was 2.1 million voters. We passed that last week. We have had more than 3 million early votes already cast. We have already set records, and those records, I think, portend well for voters who want to see change and want to see Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock join the U.S. Senate.
And we heard President Trump, in his own words, in that recorded call, pressuring the Secretary of State there to find him votes, to hand him the state where you are. How is that playing with Georgia voters? Are you hearing from people that maybe weren't considering voting before? Is it swaying anybody?
I think it's a curiosity, but it's more of the same. We have a failed president who has flouted the law his entire tenure. It's not surprising to anyone that he would do so again. However, we caution everyone who decides that this makes Brad Raffensperger a hero that we need to remember this is the same man who inherited and dealt with and participated in voter suppression when he became the Secretary of State. He is defending the election he was responsible for. He is not defending the rights of voters, and I think it's very important that we not conflate the two. It is a good thing for all voters that we are protecting this election, but it is a dangerous thing for us to ignore the person who's doing it and to presume that he is on the side of voters because he is not.
Leader Abrams, this is Abby Phillip. If Democrats want to have a majority in the Senate, they have to have a clean sweep tonight in Georgia. If that doesn't happen, what are the stakes here? What does it mean for President-elect Biden's agenda if Republicans are able to maintain control of the Senate?
I'm less concerned about the agenda and more concerned about the people. We live in a state that is a fourth the size of California, and yet we have 670,000 infections from COVID. We have more than 10,000 deaths, close to 11,000 who have died of this disease. We have 400,000 Georgians out of a job. We have 3.9 million Georgians who've either lost their jobs or had their hours reduced. We have 161,000 facing evictions if we do not restore and renew the eviction protection that was embedded in the last COVID relief package. Rather than debating what it means for an agenda, we need to talk about what it means for Georgia, what it means for America. And as Vice President, soon to be President Biden said yesterday, he doesn't want anyone who's loyal to him. He wants people who are loyal to the citizens they serve and to the Constitution. Raphael Warnock and Jon Ossoff have demonstrated that they are committed to the people of Georgia. David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler have done nothing but profit and evade answers. They've done nothing to support the people of Georgia. And so what it means is that we will find ourselves stymied and stuck, and unfortunately without relief, if we do not get the support and the leadership that will come with Raphael Warnock and Jon Ossoff joining the U.S. Senate.
And President-elect Biden is the first Democrat presidential candidate to win Georgia in 28 years. And Democrats like you hope that the state's going to become a real swing state. But, you know, there are clearly still challenges. Is it wishful thinking for Democrats if they lose these two races? And, you know, what do you think would be the lessons learned tonight if Democrats are not successful?
Well, look, being a battleground means you have to fight for victory. Republicans for 20 years took for granted their successes. We made them fight in 2018, we made them fight in 2020, and we won the battle in 2020. We're going to win this battle in 2021, whether it's by winning these two elections or by forcing Republicans to take seriously the needs of Democrats, the needs of independents, the needs of the people. We are going to be able to compel Republicans to actually have to talk about the issues and debate the issues as opposed to having a fait accompli for their ideas. That's what being a battleground means, and Georgia is firmly entrenched as a battleground state. We're going to move towards a permanent Democratic majority, but we've got a ways to go. But I'm incredibly proud of how far we've come and what we've been able to accomplish.
Well, I think there's no question we'll all be watching what happens in Georgia tonight and all the other nights after this. Stacey Abrams in Atlanta, Georgia, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
So fascinating interview in a lot of ways, but you heard her there really pushing back hard on Brad Raffensperger, partly because, first of all, Stacey Abrams is not done with politics. She's made that very clear personally. She herself is such a figure in that state. But I think secondly, Democrats, I think, are looking down the pike and they're saying, we can't let this episode with Donald Trump kind of allowing the Republican Party to eat itself alive, distract from what they've been trying to draw attention to for many years in Georgia, which is this idea of voter suppression. It's central to their turnout mechanism in these two races, but also in the future as they try to turn the state from red to blue.
Yeah, I mean, my question was about the tape and whether or not it's swaying voters. And you were pointing this out earlier, Jake, that she jumped at the chance to talk about the fact that she believes that Raffensperger is not a hero, that what he's defending is his own stewardship of the election, not the election integrity itself, which was really notable. But listen, she is somebody who has spent, she took the long view. She started in 2010, and she has been working incredibly hard to, block by block, bit by bit, in order to try to change this formerly ruby red state to at least a purple state and maybe even a Democratic state. And she's already done it. A lot of other people too, but she was a big factor on the presidential level.
Yeah, and that said, I'm not disputing anything. Stacey Abrams, former leader Abrams, has her views, has her agenda on voting rights, and obviously it should be an issue in this country that any legal voter should have the right to and ability to vote as easily as possible. That said, it's also worth pointing out that this has been an unusual presidency, an unusual post-election period, and it has been very, very difficult for Republicans to stand up for basic decency and basic facts and honesty. And on that issue, on standing up for facts and decency and the election in Georgia, Raffensperger had integrity, and that doesn't dispute anything else she said. We are heading into the final hour before voting ends in Georgia, awaiting the first results in the Senate runoffs. Our special coverage continues after this.
Live pictures coming in from Atlanta, Georgia right now. Check it out. It's a beautiful city. The balance of power here in Washington, the nation's capital, is now being decided by voters in Georgia as they cast ballots in two crucial Senate runoffs. So we want to welcome our viewers here in the United States and around the world. I'm Wolf Blitzer. This is CNN's coverage of election night in America continued. We're closing in on the first results out of Georgia. Voting ends about an hour from now. In one race, Democrat Raphael Warnock, a pastor at Martin Luther King Jr.'s former church, is running against GOP Senator Kelly Loeffler, a co-owner of a WNBA team. Also facing off tonight, Democrat and former journalist Jon Ossoff is challenging Republican incumbent David Perdue, a former CEO of Reebok and Dollar General. Remember, Democrats need to win both seats to retake control of the U.S. Senate for the first time in 6 years. That would give incoming President Joe Biden greater ability to pass his agenda with Democrats in charge of both chambers of Congress and the White House. Republicans need to win just one of the 2 seats to keep control of the Senate. That would give Mitch McConnell and the GOP greater power to push back against the new president of the United States as we await the first results. Let's go back to Jake.
Thanks, Wolf. All eyes are on Georgia as the 2020 election continues on this 5th day of 2021. We are right now monitoring key polling places in this last hour of voting. Right now, let's check back with our correspondents in Georgia. Kyung La is covering the Democratic Senate candidates. Kyung, what's the message inside the Democrats' campaigns tonight?
Well, I'm hearing this from a senior Ossoff campaign aide, and as the clock is ticking with just 1 hour left, the internal messaging is to remember that they are expecting a huge Republican lead. That is what Democrats are telling each other, to not pay too much attention to those first returns that come in and to keep the spirits high. The reason why Democrats fully expect that the first votes that'll come in will be from those smaller conservative counties. They are saying that what they need to do is to simply wait. I'm hearing from the Democrats that they are, quote, expecting to be wildly down tonight. The expectation is that the majority of votes today from the Democrats, they believe that the expectation will be that the GOP will win the day of in-person voting, and that they are hoping that people inside will just simply wait for the 4 big counties: Fulton, Cobb, DeKalb, and Gwinnett. So those are the 4 counties that they are looking at. And until then, they say just brace for what they are going to go through tonight, Jake.
That's right. Democrats banked a lot of votes in those early votes and also vote by mail. Let's go to Ryan Nobles right now at the Republican candidates' headquarters. And Ryan, President Trump obviously looming large over these Senate races like Nosferatu. What are you learning?
That's a great way to put it, Jake. And the Republican operatives I've talked to agree. They truly believe that win or lose, that President Trump will be the difference for these Republican candidates. And you can just see as the way that these Republican candidates behave throughout this entire campaign. They made a tactical choice to side with the president at every single turn. That meant leaning into his baseless claims about election fraud. It means coming in at the 11th hour and saying that they support the effort to object to the Electoral College results. It even meant contradicting prior positions they had taken, like their support for the omnibus spending bill, which only had a $600 direct payment to Americans. It meant not supporting the veto override of the National Defense Authorization Act, which President Trump vetoed, which both David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler supported. Republicans basically made the calculated assessment that there was no path to victory without having undying loyalty to President Trump. The question now is, was that the smart decision? Republicans believe that if the Loeffler and Perdue are able to make it over the hump, that it was a wise choice, and maybe it tells us about the future of Republican politics. But if they fall short tonight, it could mean that perhaps President Trump isn't as popular in this state as once thought, and also that there's a potential that they turned off independent and moderate voters. Jake, it's a question we're not going to know the answer for, maybe not tonight, or maybe even for the next couple of days. Jake.
All right, Ryan, thanks so much. Let's go to David Chalian now, who has more in terms of exit polls. David, what are you learning about today's voters?
Yeah, we're going to take a look at 2 of the biggest issues. Just to remind everyone, these are preliminary exit poll numbers, Jake, and these exit polls are exit polls that represent all the voters, whether they voted by mail, absentee, whether they voted in person early, or whether they showed up at the polls today. It's all included in this exit poll of Georgia voters. In terms of priorities, take a look at Perdue voters here. These are people who said they voted for David Perdue today, or in this election in the runoff. Rebuilding the economy, 69% of them say that is the higher priority, over only 25% of Perdue voters that say the priority is containing the coronavirus. Compare that with Ossoff voters, it's a totally different universe. 79% of Ossoff voters say containing the coronavirus is the more important thing to be doing right now. Only 17% say that is true for rebuilding the economy. We're also seeing how the economic pain caused by COVID is disproportionately impacting these different electorates. Among the Purdue voters, again, among Purdue voters in this race, only 9% say they are experiencing severe financial hardship, 40% moderate financial hardship, and half of Purdue voters say no financial hardship at all in their world caused by COVID. That is a very different story than Ossoff voters. Look at this. 21% of Ossoff voters say they're experiencing severe financial hardship. Another 39% say moderate. And it's just 38% that say they have not experienced any financial hardship at all. I mean, these are really different kinds of voters that are showing up in these record numbers today. Jake?
All right, David Chalian, thank you so much. And that's fascinating because what you have there, Dana and Abby, is Ossoff voters, Democratic voters, saying that they have been more severely impacted by the coronavirus, financially impacted, but also saying that reopening the economy is the secondary priority to getting in control of the virus.
It really is, and it's just a snapshot reminder of how, unfortunately, how partisan this virus is and has been almost since day one, largely because people who are in charge made it that way. And by people, I mean the President of the United States. I mean, from not wearing a mask and making that partisan for whatever reason, it still boggles my mind. Something that is as basic a health issue as that is partisan, and really still is, makes no sense. But the fact that these voters, people who are going to the polls either earlier today in this runoff election, this pair of runoff elections, have such disparate views of the virus and the health concerns versus the economy is Exhibit A.
This is also a state that has a really large African American and less large but significant Hispanic population. And those are two groups that have been disproportionately hurt financially, but also health-wise by this virus. They have been getting sick at disproportionate rates, dying at disproportionate rates. So it doesn't surprise me that when you look at Ossoff voters, you'll see that people are both worried about the health impacts of the virus and also worried about the financial impacts. But when it comes down to it, I think the folks who are dying and getting sick at disproportionate rates recognize that you can't have a job if you're not alive. And I think that is what you're seeing in these numbers here. On the other hand, when you looked at earlier, John King was showing us on the magic wall where Georgia is in this pandemic. It is worse now than it has ever been in that state. So I would be curious to see whether that produces any sort of shift in how people vote, considering that things are so much worse now than they were, when they had an earlier spike over the summer, and things were very, very bad in that state.
Worse in Georgia, worse pretty much across the United States right now, which makes it all the more remarkable that tomorrow Congress is going to spend its time dealing with Republicans trying to undermine the results of the election instead of coming together, Wolf, to try to get a hold of this pandemic and have the economy recover.
Yeah, thousands of Americans are dying every single week. It's a horrendous, horrendous pandemic, and it continues. You know, John, we're looking at Georgia right now. So much is at stake right now, especially as the new administration is about to come into office. You're looking at some key places that we should be watching. Polls close, in about 50 minutes from now?
All right, so in about an hour, we should start to get the first votes. And before I go through the counties, just again, broken record from November, we need to be careful. Some counties will show us early votes, right? It's going to be faster this time. So we'll see some early votes. You might see Democrat taking a lead in a county that's normally Republican. You might see the flip side. We're seeing Election Day votes only at first. So a Republican might take a lead in a place for Democrats. We need to be patient and get through the night, take a few hours to get context. But this will fill in starting in about an hour. Let's go back to 2020, and let's use this is the presidential race. Joe Biden wins by 11,000 votes. Let's use this as our guide for places we want to watch. Just today, we've heard from our correspondents on the ground that here in DeKalb County, just outside of Atlanta, to the east of Atlanta. The turnout today exceeds turnout in a presidential election. That's incredibly unusual in a runoff election. Normally, after a presidential election, turnout drops down. Well, turnout's up here. So Democrats say, wow, that's great for us, right? Because look, Biden 83, Donald Trump 16%. Just look at the Senate race here in the Ossoff-Perdue race. Ossoff 81, Perdue 17 if you round up. So if you're the Democrats, you look at DeKalb County and you say, wow, we're doing what we need to do. But this is why Georgia has 159 counties. Do not get caught up on what you might see on the internet or you might hear from a friend about any one county, because there are 159 in all. Our correspondents on the ground are also telling us that in Forsyth County, turnout is up today, exceeding what happened in November. Election day turnout higher than, well, look, Jon Ossoff got swamped in Forsyth County. This is a place that is absolutely critical for Republican turnout. We can look at the presidential race. It's the same thing. 2-1 for Donald Trump. So turnout is up here, too. It may be that both parties are turning out their voters. We've also heard, and we showed some pictures earlier today. We don't know the final numbers yet, but you showed some pictures on TV of long lines in Cherokee County. This is a place we will watch tonight. Is the Trump base turning out? Is this divide among Republicans, the fight between the president and state officials like the governor and the Secretary of State, is it impacting Republican turnout? Cherokee County is a place we will see, because you see it here. That's how it played out in the presidential race. It was one of the reasons it was so close, because the president did so well. And look at David Perdue, the same thing. One other thing, Wolf, when you come back in, the bulk of the vote comes out of here, the Atlanta metropolitan area. It's the largest part of the state. So what will happen today? I just showed you DeKalb. Now let's come in on Fulton County. And let's look at this. This is very important tonight. Does the animus toward Trump in the suburbs, does it carry over tonight? He's not on the ballot this time. So you see right here, Fulton County. Yes, it's Atlanta. That's what it's known for. But there are also suburbs to the southwest, suburbs to the north of Atlanta that are incredibly important. And traditionally in Georgia, those suburbs are Republican, or they lean Republican, or at least Republicans are competitive to keep elections close. Look at this. David Perdue in Fulton County, 146,000 votes. You say, well, he only got 28% of the vote. But in a close election, look at his 146. In the presidential race, the president, 137,000 and change. David Perdue did better than Donald Trump in Fulton County. He did better in the suburbs around Atlanta. That is a traditional Republican vote. Does that happen today? Same thing happened over in Cobb County. The president gets 42% of the vote, 165,000 votes right there. Well, Senator Perdue gets 169,000. You may say, well, it's only 4,000 votes. In a close election, 4,000 votes is a ton of votes. So we're going to watch Democratic turnout in Atlanta. We're going to see if these Republican Senate candidates without Trump on the ballot can do a traditional performance in the suburbs, as opposed to a Trump era Republicans getting shellacked in the suburbs. And we'll look over here as well. Chatham County, this was key. When Joe Biden, remember, Donald Trump was leading and leading and leading. 3 days into the count in Georgia, President Trump was still leading. This is one of the places where the late mail-in ballots and the early voting, as it was counted later, brought Joe Biden back. So we'll look out there as well. A lot to count, Wolf, and we'll get to it pretty soon.
Any indication, John, they're going to count the early votes better this time, earlier this time? We're not going to have to wait 2, 3, 4, 5 days?
We do expect for most of the counties it will happen more quickly, because it was optional on Election Day back in November, because of the pandemic, because it was so unusual, because you had every state, but including Georgia, trying to quickly adapt. Some people are voting early by mail. Some people are voting early, showing up in person. Then you had the big Election Day turnout in the middle of a pandemic with safety concerns. It was left up to the counties to decide, do you count Election Day votes first? Do you process those other ballots? They've been told this time to try to do it. So most of the counties have said they've already processed, meaning check to see if they are legitimate, have them in a stack for that, and then at 7 o'clock they can start counting them. So we do expect in most places that will be done more quickly, but we should also learn from 2020 and elections in recent years. Let's just wait, see how it plays out, count votes.
The old-fashioned way. We'll wait to see the votes actually counted. Stand by. We're less than an hour away right now from the first results in the Georgia Senate runoffs, and we'll have new exit poll information. That's coming up. Stay with us. The clock right now is running down on one of the most consequential Senate runoff elections in U.S. history. As we near the first votes out of Georgia in about 40 minutes from now, we have more exit poll results coming in. So what's the latest, David? What are you learning?
Well, we asked voters to sort of weigh in on how they perceive the ideological positions of each of the candidates. Let's run through them. David Perdue's positions on the issues. What do you think? 49% of voters in this runoff say it's about right. 35% say too conservative. Only 9% obviously would say too liberal. Take a look at Jon Ossoff, his opponent in the race. And here's where I think you start to see the attack line from David Perdue and from the Republicans that the Democrats in these races are way liberal and socialist. Look at this. 46% say about right, but a higher number here say that Ossoff is too liberal, 44%, than say too conservative for David Perdue, only 4% too conservative. We see a similar thing in the other race. Take a look here at Kelly Loeffler's positions. 49% say they're about right, 35% too conservative, 9% say too liberal. And again, with Raphael Warnock, we see some of that liberal label having some staying power. 46% say his issues, his position on the issues is about right. The same number, 46%, say Raphael Warnock's positions are too liberal. 3% say too conservative. Wolf.
All right, David, stand by. We're going to get back to you. Meanwhile, we have some new reporting coming in from our correspondents on the ground in Georgia. Drew Griffith is joining us from Atlanta right now. I understand, Drew, you have some new information on election misinformation that's swirling out there online. What are you learning?
You know, it's just the conflicting messages largely aimed at Republicans that have been getting inundated in their mailboxes and in their social media sites. According to Advanced Democracy, a nonpartisan group that analyzes the social messaging, the number of Twitter posts surrounding the Georgia election has doubled in the last week. Not unsurprising. What is surprising is that 4 of the top 5 Twitter posts around this election, Wolf, are from Donald Trump himself, and all 4 of them involve unsubstantiated or incendiary claims about voter irregularities or voter fraud in the state. One of them, actually, I have to point out to you, said, this is from President Trump, when are we going to do signature verification in Fulton County? I'm here in the Fulton County Election Center. They're on break right now, a dinner break, but there's a whole section of this group of people devoted to just that, signature verification. So President Trump either woefully ill-informed on this or is simply deliberately lying. But the confusion and the misinformation comes in if you are a conservative and you have been brought into Parler, which is a kind of a conservative Twitterverse for the conservatives who are kind of protesting social media. On Parler, the hashtags boycott Georgia election, boycott Georgia runoffs, and boycott Georgia are just flying off the handle. 6,800 different posts with that hashtag have been sent around telling many in Georgia to boycott this election. That could be troubling for Republicans, but again, they're getting this mixed message from the White House on down. Do we trust this election enough to vote, or do we just somehow boycott this election because we don't trust the process that's about to take place right behind me?
Yeah,
Wolf?
This is so disturbing, all this disinformation, misinformation that's out there. Drew, we're going to get back to you. I want to go from Atlanta to Savannah right now. You know, Martin Savage is on the ground for us over there. Martin, hovering over all of this, as we've been reporting, is this coronavirus pandemic. How is it impacting this election from your vantage point?
It's having a huge impact. But before I get to that, Wolf, I just want to give you the very latest information we just have received now. There are 2 polling places in 2 precincts in Chatham County now that are going to extend their voting time. In other words, they're going to go from the state closing time of 7 p.m. to now one of them will go to 7:33 and the other will go to 7:35. That's due to some technical issues they had this morning. So the Board of Elections here went to a judge and was able to get that order. The judge said, okay, because of those technical difficulties, they would extend by about a half hour the voting. As to coronavirus, yeah, it's of course always in the background and in the back of the minds of voters here. And just today, there was a precinct. It's actually the Islands Christian precinct. It's a church. And 2 people walked into that precinct this morning and identified to the manager that they were COVID positive. Now, there is a protocol that's been in place here in Chatham County to handle just that kind of circumstance. In some precincts where they have a lot of room, they actually have a separate space set aside with a separate screen for such people. This precinct was so small they didn't have that, so what they did was they evacuated the entire precinct. They allowed the couple, it was a husband and wife, to come in to cast their ballots, and then as soon as they were done, they went through a thorough clean and disinfection of the entire precinct. Took about 15 minutes for that, and then they reopen again for the general public to vote. So it just shows you that these are extraordinary times. But despite that, extraordinary efforts are being made so that everyone can cast their ballots and vote. Well,
so important, Martin, important information you're giving us. Thank you very, very much. Anderson, back to you.
Yeah, well, thanks. Former President Obama has tweeted out telling people in Georgia that as long as they are in line if they're still in line before, I'll read it to you word for word. Georgia voters, if you're in line before the polls close at 7 p.m., stay there. You have the right to vote no matter how long it takes. If you have questions, call the Georgia Voter Protection Hotline. Gives the number. Let's bring this home. David, how late do you think, I mean, at what point tonight do you think we're going to start to get a sense of where things are going?
Well, the question is, will we get a sense tonight? I think we'll get a sense tonight if this thing is very close and whether we're going to go into overtime, as some of the election officials seem to believe will be the case. I think that, you know, if there's a trend line, remember, Ossoff lost, Purdue won by 88,000 votes. If this thing is on the same track, you know, county by county, we'll get a sense of that. The harder one to read may be the second race, because they didn't have a one-on-one they had this jungle, probably there were 20 candidates or something. But, you know, what was interesting about the exit poll that David just read on who was too liberal, just right, too conservative, so on, the Loeffler numbers and the Purdue numbers were identical. The Ossoff numbers and the Warnock numbers were identical. And it makes you wonder if that people are going to, you know, it's unusual for there to be a split in a situation like this, whether if one of them is ahead, that both of them are likely to win on either side. So, you know, we just have to look.
This election has been nationalized to such a degree that it's almost as if, in a way, they're interchangeable, these candidates, to many people, because, you know, the Republicans are claiming that both of these candidates are dangerous radicals and that they are the firewall against socialism in this country. This race, these races are incredibly important. As we know, control of the Senate is at stake. The Biden agenda is at stake. You could argue the Biden presidency is at stake in all of this. But the Republicans have been very successful, I think, in saying these are the people, these people stand between you and radical socialism. The problem that the Republicans have is the President of the United States, who has complicated issues for them because he's telling people that elections are rigged. We've seen from these exit polls that people who have turned out to vote or sent in their ballots believe that it's going to be a free and fair election and that their ballots will be counted.
Can I say something about the name calling? I was talking to some people at Black Voters Matter, and they were saying that the name calling against Warnock in particular is actually driving a lot of their turnout, because they know Warnock and they know that he is somebody who has stood up for poor people, who stood up for working people. He's not any kind of radical. And so they're actually saying Trump coming, believe it or not, Trump coming and continuing to sort of stir the pot is actually helping to lift some of the turnout and trying to get to the end of this race to get people to come out who haven't already. It's actually the name calling. Every time she mentions him, she says, the radical, the radical. And they were saying at these big events, when that happened, the whole room would just go nuts, so angry and want to go fight even harder.
Rick, do you think the president's, you know, the visits, but also the rhetoric he's been doing about the election in general, does it motivate Republicans in Georgia to go out and vote and make it right? Does it make people stay home? I mean, there's no way to judge it, I guess, unless
the president is a great motivator. I mean, he
on
is,
both sides.
On both sides. I think we saw that in the November election. He can turn out people on both sides. Right. And I think he's turning out, from all indications, this is going to be an historic election in Georgia where you're going to see massive turnout. Right. And the concern Republicans have is the massive turnout going to happen on Election Day, which is needed for Republicans. Because if you look at all of the early modeling that was done, the Democrats walking into Election Day had a pretty nice lead going into Election Day. And can the president get those people energized? And from what it seems to be, and from the exit polls, the answer is yes. Question is it enough? I think we're going to have a close race, but I'm feeling better now than what I did when I sat down here.
Yeah.
Can we just say to everyone, be patient? Because as with during the presidential election, you may see results that look one way early on because ballots start to get counted.
Well, there's going to be those suspicious midnight,
those midnight dumps.
Dumps of voters, votes.
So it might look one way at 7 o'clock at night and look another way.
But it is. I mean, it's hard to be patient given what is at stake. I mean, this 48-hour period is just this extraordinary period that we're going to be covering.
It really is, and the stakes really can't be overemphasized. The fact of the matter is, it really does matter who runs the United States Senate, who gets to control what reaches the floor, and who the committee chairs are. And I mean, Senator Santorum can speak to this. It's going to be a narrow margin either way, and that's going to create situations that are challenging for both sides. But who has essentially the gavel is really, really important here, and it's going to describe how what Joe Biden can do as president of the United States in many ways.
The real key question, and that conservatives and Republicans about is not just who has the gavel, because historically having a 50-50 control of the Senate didn't really give you much control. However, if the Democrats use this 50-50 control to abolish the filibuster, for example, then all of a sudden 50-50 becomes just as powerful of a majority as a one-vote majority in the House, which is an absolute majority. So
that's your fear. Here's our fear on the other side, is that if Mitch McConnell continues to act the way that he acted under Obama and the way that he tends to act, you basically have a complete obstruction, the inability for Joe Biden to solve some of these problems. The reason that people are out there voting right now, they need those survival checks. They need a better rollout on this vaccine. People need real help. And I think the fear that we have is if you don't have control of the Senate, you're going to have exactly what you've got right now, an economy that is faltering, gridlock in Washington, D.C., a botched rollout on the vaccine, and real pain. And so you got fear on both sides. They're afraid of socialism. We're afraid of the pain that we have right now not being addressed even by President Biden.
If anything's going to get done in the Congress, it's going to be at the 40-yard line. No matter who takes control. Obviously, Joe Biden wants control for all the reasons that David laid out, not the least of which is getting his cabinet.
His appointees.
Not the least of which. But the question to me right now is so interesting is Mitch McConnell. He's really mad at these people who are fooling around here, the 12 or 13 folks who are causing him heartburn right now. And he said the vote we cast is the most consequential one I'll ever cast. We know where he is on this electoral college shenanigans. So is the Republican coalition going to be with Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz? Or is it going to be with Mitt Romney and Susan Collins and Senator Murkowski? Who knows?
We are in the final countdown to the end of voting. The first results in the Georgia Senate runoff. Stay with us.
Polls close right at the top of the hour in this high-stakes double Senate runoff in Georgia. We're standing by for the first votes. Stick around. In the meantime, I want to go back to David Chalian. He's getting some more exit poll information. What else are you learning, David?
Yeah, we're looking at different demographic groups and how they have confidence in the vote count, both in November and today. Look here in Georgia in these runoffs. Among white voters was the 2020 presidential election in Georgia conducted fairly. Only 40% of white voters in this election say yes. 57% say no, that it was not conducted fairly back in November. Compare that to black voters, Wolf. I mean, this difference is really astonishing. 88% of black voters in these races say, yeah, the November 2020 presidential election was conducted fairly. Only 9% of African-American voters say, no, it wasn't. What about confidence in the tallying of votes in this election? Well, look here. Among white voters, 63% say they're very or somewhat confident that their votes will be counted accurately today in these runoffs. Look at black voters and compare there. 93% say they're very or somewhat confident that their votes are going to be counted accurately. You see a much more confident electorate among African Americans than you do among white voters in Georgia as it relates to the conducting of the election, Wolf.
Very, very interesting indeed. All right, David, stand by. We're getting some new information right now from Georgia's Secretary of State's office. CNN's Amara Walker is in Atlanta for us. You were at this news conference, I understand. Amara, what did you learn?
So, Wolf, 20 minutes before the polls close, and the overall message from Gabriel Sterling is that it has been, so far, a very smooth election day. Just in the past hour or so, he did say that we are seeing lines approaching about an hour during this rush hour traffic. And he also mentioned that there are some polling sites in 4 counties, Houston, Cherokee, Paulding, and Forsyth, where they have been granted extensions to the voting time. So you'll now be seeing some polling sites there that'll stay open until 7:04, as late as 7:40, to make up for some delays. Also, Sterling mentioned that there was an accident near a precinct in Ware County that caused delays of about 45 minutes for voters to actually get to their precincts. So it's unclear at this time whether or not the county will go to court and request an extension. But all in all, so far, Gabriel Sterling is saying that things are moving steadily and smoothly. We should get the first flood of returns between 7:30 and 9 o'clock tonight, and that is when we'll have a better idea of what the turnout looked like today on Election Day. We already saw a record-breaking turnout in early votes, 3.1 million votes cast. Gabriel Sterling saying, look, I don't want to make any predictions or estimates right now. It's really hard to tell how many people are going to turn out or have turned out so far today, but he is hoping to see somewhere between 600,000 to 1.1 million people voting here in Georgia in the Senate runoff today. Back to you.
Today, more than 3 million did it early. Amara, stick around. We'll get back to you, John. We're going to get a ton of votes, but not necessarily a decisive amount. We're going to have to wait a while.
We're going to have to wait a while. And again, if you were with us back in November, this will be a little bit different because all the localities in Georgia have been told this time, be prepared. Process your early votes, process your absentee ballots, process them. You can't count them till the polls close at 7 o'clock, but process them so you can count them right away, as opposed to some counties just set them aside in November because they were overwhelmed with the pandemic. But it's interesting. What Amara just said is important. Again, don't believe or don't make a bet on any one piece or 2 pieces or even 3 pieces of anecdotal evidence. But what she just said in the report from Mr. Sterling, the election administrator, is very important, because what did she note? She said in Forsyth County, there were lines there, long lines there waiting. They were going to keep some precincts open. Forsyth County, a big Republican county, absolutely critical to Republican chances tonight. Another county she mentioned where there were lines is Cherokee County. Again, look at this in the Senate race here, more than 2 to 1 there. Same in the presidential race. It was a more 2 to 1. Turnout in these counties, absolutely critical. The Republicans expect, when it comes to the early voting, either in person or mail-in, that the Democrats, when those votes are counted, will have an advantage. So today, turnout is critical. Lines in Cherokee County. Again, there are 159 counties in Georgia. I'm not saying go make a bet on Vegas on this, but it's important. Where else did she mention? She came down here and she mentioned Houston County. Again, not as big a margin, but a Republican county where they say there are lines of people waiting to vote. That's very important there. And the 4th county she mentioned was up here just west of Atlanta, northwest of Atlanta, Paulding County. Again, all 4 of the counties I just mentioned, Wolf, reliably Republican places, Republicans saying it is absolutely essential that they have those lines as the polls close, that they have a high Election Day turnout to counter the Democratic advantage in early voting. Those 4 counties do not tell us the full picture, but if you're a Republican and you're trying to ask, are we doing what we need to do? Those are the places you're looking, especially Cherokee and Forsyth, larger counties. You're looking, are we getting our Election Day turnout? So if you're looking for nuggets just to keep you in the game and you're a Republican, you would be encouraged by that. But remember, the polls close soon. We got a lot of votes to count.
We certainly do, and we will be counting them together with everyone else. All right, John, stand by. We're getting closer and closer to the end of voting across most of Georgia right now. We're awaiting the first votes and the last word on who controls the United States Senate. It's all ahead. Take a look at this live pictures coming in from Atlanta, Georgia. Beautiful shot indeed. We're closing in on the first results in the Georgia Senate runoffs. Polls across most of the state right now will close right at the top of the hour. Two crucial contests at stake, pitting Democrat Raphael Warnock against GOP Senator Kelly Loeffler and Democrat Jon Ossoff against Republican incumbent David Perdue. We could soon get our first sense of whether Democrats are on track to win both seats and take control of the U.S. Senate, building on President-elect Biden's historic victory. Remember, Republicans need to win only one of the seats to stay in charge of the Senate, allowing Mitch McConnell and the GOP to hold on to a center of power right here in Washington. Jake, the polls are about to close in these two very important Senate races.
That's right, Wolf. And as voting winds down, preparations to count the ballots are underway. We're inside processing centers in Atlanta and DeKalb County. Right now, let's go back to our correspondents covering the campaigns. Kyung La, one of the Democratic Senate candidates, made a late stop just a short while ago.
In the very last hour, we're told that Jon Ossoff stopped by a precinct, a heavily Democratic precinct, to talk to voters and to wave at them and to do some line warming. This is a last-hour-ditch effort in this particular precinct to try to keep the faithful in line. We're seeing tweets now from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris urging anyone who is in line to stay in line. If you are in line at 7 p.m. in the state of Georgia, you can stay in line. We're told from the Ossoff campaign from there, he is going to be heading to sit and watch the returns with his campaign. As far as the Warnock campaign, he will also be in the Atlanta area. His campaign says that they believe what is broken through and what will ultimately get him across the finish line is the message of the New South, that Warnock represents the New South. He would be the first black senator from Georgia. Jon Ossoff would be the very first Jewish senator from Georgia. They believe that those positive, inspirational messages are what got Democrats out and will ultimately lead to a Democratic victory. So again, polls close at 7 o'clock. We're seeing this flurry of messages from the Democrats to stay in line, Jake.
All right, Kyung La, thanks so much. Now to CNN's Ryan Nobles at the GOP candidates' headquarters. And Ryan, Republicans are sending a message to voters tonight as well.
Yeah, that's right, Jake. We have talked all night about how important Election Day is in terms of turnout for the Republican candidates, and that means right up to 7 o'clock and past 7 o'clock if need be. And the Republicans that I'm talking to say in particular that they've been impressed by the surge in turnout in key Republican counties in the 5 p.m. hour. After many people have ended their workday, there were long lines in some key counties, particularly in the northern part of the state where President Trump was last night, and then in the southeast along the coast where there are some key red counties as well. And what they are, much like Kyung said the Democrats are doing, they're encouraging Republicans that if they get in line before 7 o'clock to stay in line, because as long as you're there before the polls close, you are able to vote. And in addition to that, Jake, Republicans are focused on the fact that there have been some court-ordered mandates that have extended the time that voting can take place in certain precincts in several of the counties. So they want to make sure to reach out to all the Republican voters and say that if you haven't cast that ballot, there's a good chance that you're going to have an opportunity before 7 o'clock tonight. So the Republicans, and we've emphasized this all night, they need to get their voters out on election night, and that's why they are not stopping their push to get them to the polls before they close, which now looks to Jake to be well after 7 o'clock tonight. Jake.
All right, Ryan Nobles, thank you so much. Now let's check in on the voting with Amara Walker. She's been getting information on what comes next. What are you learning from the Office of Secretary of State Raffensperger?
Well, the overall message has been that the voting has been going quite smoothly, and towards the end of the day, in the last hour or so, they've been reporting longer lines at 4 different counties. The news, though, was that there are some polling sites in 4 different counties that have been granted extensions, not very long extensions, ranging from closing from 7:01 to about 7:40 tonight. And those 4 counties that have been granted extensions at a precinct is Gwinnett, Columbia, Tift, and Chatham counties. It's Tift, a precinct in Tift County that will remain open until 7:40 tonight to make up for some delays. We know that there are 3 counties where some precincts have also requested extensions. They have not yet been granted, but Sterling did say that typically these extensions are granted by the court. And so these counties include Cobb, Gilmer, and Cherokee. So that's the latest. Overall, things have been going smoothly. The polls are closing in the next 10 minutes, and we should be getting a pretty good idea of just the turnout in the next couple of hours.
All right, thank you so much. And I am really eager to hear what that turnout number is, because at the beginning of the day, I was told by Republicans and Democrats that the higher the turnout today, the better for Republicans. Usually people think better turnout is good for Democrats, but Democrats have banked so much on the early vote and on the vote by mail. And the thought was, if turnout is around 850,000 or less, Democrats have a shot, because it's going to be disproportionately today's vote Republican. But if it is 900,000 or more, then Republicans will probably have a pretty good night.
Yeah, I think that that's probably about right, because of, you know, I mean, we were even talking about the early in-person, early absentee vote being in record territory. You know, over 3 million votes cast even before today. But if Republicans can have a pretty significant lead today, they can catch up. And that's what they're hoping for. And I think Democrats are realistic about this. They're realistic that Republican voters, the most reliable ones, the ones who care about party control of the Senate, are going to show up today. Those are the people who are easier voters to turn out, frankly, than many voters that Democrats have to rely upon, typically in most elections, younger voters, people of color in particular, who are just very difficult constituencies to get out to vote.
And that's the key here is, I mean, it is cliche to say it's about turnout, but even more than on a normal election, in a runoff election, it's not about whether or not you necessarily like the person or whether you're necessarily deciding between two ideologies. It's whether you feel like voting on January 5th. And that's why we heard from Stacey Abrams in the last hour about the effort that they have been doing, the remarkable effort that they have had underway for years, but particularly in the last several weeks. Republicans have, you know, lots of paid staff on the ground, lots of effort with surrogates, with a lot of money. I mean, there's no shortage of money on both sides. But the Republicans in particular understand that this is a very different terrain, Georgia, than it has been in a very long time, which is why it's the only show in town, but why they devoted so many resources to try to getting out the vote.
So we are all eagerly awaiting, Wolf, that number today. How many people voted today in Georgia? Wolf. And that will give us a good indication of what potentially could happen. Let's go over to Pamela Brown. She's at the CNN voting desk watching all of this. More than 3 million Georgians voted early, and now we'll see how many voted today.
That's right. I just spoke to Gabriel Sterling, who's the voting systems manager there in Georgia, and he tells me we're going to see a flood of results between 7:30 p.m. and 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. That's because polls close in just a few minutes in a majority of places in Georgia, 7 p.m. Eastern. We do know a few of the polling places will stay open a little bit later in that 7 p.m. hour due to issues in some areas. But the big question when you think about that, of course, is what are you going to see when we see those results? And here's what we know. We're going to take a little bit of a closer look at Atlanta, Metro Atlanta, and the surrounding suburbs, particularly Cobb and Gwinnett counties. We know that they will tabulate early votes first. That, of course, would seem to favor the Democrats. They plan to report votes by 8 p.m. tonight, that first wave. And then you look at DeKalb County. They plan to count absentee ballots first. Again, that would favor the Democrats. Then they're going to process the in-person election and early voting in-person votes. They tell us, their officials there in DeKalb tell us the majority of the results will be counted tonight. The deadline for final results there is on Friday. But what's interesting to note is my colleague Nick Valencia is reporting tonight that there were more in-person voters today there in DeKalb County than there were in November on the election day then. So that's worth noting. And of course, these are also counties we're keeping an eye on, Wolf, because these are counties that Biden won during the general election. And this is where Democrats are looking closely to try to drive that turnout.
We're going to look for all sorts of indications on who's up and who's down. Everybody stand by. John King, you're looking as closely as anyone right now, and you've got the magic wall to help.
Right, and so this is the 2020 Senate race between David Perdue and Jon Ossoff In just a few moments, the polls close. We'll start to fill this in. Places where the precincts are kept open, they will wait a little bit. Where are we going to look for? Well, let's use the 2020 map to just think about it. Pam just mentioned, and it's very important, the Atlanta and the suburbs around it. This is the bulk of the population of the state, is the key to Joe Biden's victory. It's also a dramatically big challenge tonight. Can those Republican candidates, David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler, have a traditional Georgia race in the suburbs? Will they do as Georgia Republicans traditionally do in the suburbs here, or will they suffer as President Trump did when he was on the ballot from this suburban revolt that we have seen throughout the Trump presidency? Without Trump on the ballot, Republicans are hoping they will do better there. Another giant question is, because of the president's attacks on the governor, attacks on the system, attacks on the Secretary of State, will some Trump voters stay home and say, I don't trust this process? Where are we going to look for that? Well, one of the places we'll look for it is right up here along the northern border. Murray County up here. Whitfield County is where the president had his rally last night. Does the Trump base turn out? And again, it's anecdotal, but it is important to note, we have heard already that there are long lines in Forsyth County. That's a big Republican county. And long lines in Cherokee County. That is key to Republican turnout today. Wolf, we know where we're going to watch, and pretty soon we get to count them.
Going to get the actual results. That's so significant. We're just moments away now from the end of voting across most of Georgia. Control of the United States Senate is at stake. Democrats hope to flip 2 seats in tonight's crucial runoffs. Republicans needing to win only one of the 2 races to maintain their Senate majority. All right, the first of many key race alerts right now. Too early to call in both of these Senate contests. We're watching very closely. We expect results coming in momentarily. We will share those with you as well. Take a look at this. In the first Senate runoff in Georgia, Jon Ossoff and David Perdue. Too early to call. David Perdue, the incumbent senator, as well. The other Senate runoff race, Raphael Warnock and Kelly Loeffler. Too early to call over there as well. We're watching all of this very closely. The balance of power right now. This is why it is so important. As of right now, there are 50 Republicans in the U.S. Senate, 48 Democrats, 2 of them independents, but they caucus with the Democrats. If the Democrats win both of the Senate runoff seats in Georgia right now, it will be 50-50. The incoming Vice President, Kamala Harris, is the president of the Senate. The Democrats will have the majority. That's why the Democrats need to pick up 2 seats, both of these seats in Georgia tonight, in order to be the majority in the U.S. Senate. We shall find out fairly soon. David Chalian, tell us what you're seeing right now.
We have some really fascinating exit poll results. Now that the polls have closed, Wolf, we can take a look at how some of these voters are splitting between the candidates. Look at voters of color. Voters of color made up about 38% of the electorate. Jon Ossoff in the Ossoff-Perdue race is winning 84% of them. That is a slight increase from what he did in November. He won 78% of voters of color back in November. They were about the same slice of the electorate. So this is a really good sign for Ossoff. Perdue at 16% with voters of color. Take a look at white college-educated voters. This has been a real battleground demographic. They make up about 24% of the electorate. Perdue wins them here in the runoff 62% to 38%. That is a 24-point margin of victory with white college-educated voters for Perdue. Back in November, he only won them by 14 points. So Perdue dramatically increased his margin over Ossoff with these critical voters as well. Little something for everyone there in these exit polls, Wolf.
Very interesting indeed. With polls now closed across almost all of the state, we're getting updates on turnout in key counties right now. See, there's Drew Griffin is in Atlanta for us right now. So what are you hearing about Fulton County, where you are? Drew, what's some new information?
The hard number is going to be around 450,000 people in this county took part in this election. That compares to 528,000 in November. Really pretty good for a runoff election. They're going to be starting to release some of those vote counts very soon. In fact, more than 100,000 of the absentee ballots have already been scanned. The early voting numbers, we should see those coming in very soon. Richard Barron, the elections director, says in minutes we should see those absentee ballots being reported to us. And every hour between now and 9 o'clock, he expects all of the 270,000 or so early in-person votings to be tabulated. they'll also then be attacking the vote that was coming in today. So we're about to see some really hard numbers. The voting was up, but not as many people participated in Fulton County as they did in November. And I want to stress, this is a Democratic county. There were no big lines today in Fulton County in-person voting.
Yeah, very, very interesting indeed. Let's see what happens. You know, John, Fulton County, give us a little perspective on what we're about to see, because they're about to release a whole bunch of votes.
Right, and so we'll see where that turnout is. We'll see if Democrats upped or lost from their early voting advantage in the presidential election. You see it blank right now. We're going to wait just moments. We'll get some votes. So let's go back. This is the Biden-Trump race. I want to use the Ossoff-Perdue race, the Senate race, because the vote totals are a little different as you look at it right here. This was the clean one-on-one. We're not showing the Warnock-Loeffler race because, remember, that was the jungle primary. It was crowded. This was a one-on-one, so we think it's a better comparison. Why does Fulton County matter? Well, Fulton County matters, number one, because it's the largest county in the state, the largest population center of the 159 counties in the state of Georgia. Number two, it matters to the Democrats because of this. They tend to have a big lopsided margin there. I will say, though, that as David Chalian just noted, when you see the exit polls showing Senator Perdue doing better than he did in November with white college-educated voters, that suggests he will do better in the suburbs. And Fulton County, we think about it as Atlanta, the major urban center, but look how big it is. There are suburbs down here. There are suburbs up here. The whole county will be blue at the end of the night, but by how much is critical to how tonight ends up for both Loeffler and Perdue. And so you see 70 to 28 there. This will be critical to watch, not just the turnout, but whether Senator Perdue, without Donald Trump on the ballot, can do better in the suburbs with those white college-educated voters, many of whom who are Republicans, maybe more moderate Republicans, who simply don't like the president and don't want to vote Republican when he's on the ballot. That will be one critical thing to watch there. David also noted that Ossoff's performance among black voters seems to be up. In the exit polls, it is up higher than it was in November. That was a key priority for Democrats after November. Yes, Joe Biden carried the state, if you come back to the presidential race, but Democrats frankly said they could have done a better job. They should have done a better job getting a higher turnout, even though Joe Biden won by percentages, lopsided, in Atlanta, in Savannah, and elsewhere. They wanted to register more black voters and turn out more black voters in that period of time they had between November and now. So David just went through two of the many pieces of the chess match, tug-of-war, call it what you will tonight. Can Republicans do a better job in the suburbs? Well, those white college-educated voters are one indicator of that. Can Democrats do a better job turning? Even a better job. Joe Biden won the state. Democrats did an excellent job in November, but they understand without Trump on the ballot, they need to do even more with younger voters and African Americans. So those exit polls show you, number one, they tell you expect it to be close. And number two, they get at the complexity of coalition building in a state like this. They call it a battleground state for a reason. It's complicated and it's hard.
Take us a little bit through a replay of what happened November 3rd, November 4th, November 5th, because early on, it looked like Trump was doing great, but then all of a sudden the early votes the mail-in ballots were counted, and things changed relatively quickly.
You're absolutely right. And we may have the flip side of that tonight. If the counties now, because of the experience in November, give us early ballots first, right? Absentee ballots or mail-in ballots, as many of the counties say they'll give us first. We may see the flip side of that. Back in November, almost all of the counties gave us Election Day voting first. And Election Day voting benefits Republicans. So let's go back in time. I'm on the presidential race, so let me go there. And let's get back to the beginning. This was very early on. The very first votes that came in were some early votes, and you saw Joe Biden with an early lead. This is 7:16 on election night. 16 minutes after the polls closed, we got the first results. And then as we went through the night, by late night, Donald Trump was ahead. Because why? You see all this red. Counties were reporting Election Day voting, and they were still getting ready to count some of the other votes. So you see Biden up in these Democratic areas, but all the red coming in for Donald Trump. And now watch this grow. Right here, it's 7,200 votes at 8 o'clock on election night. Well, by the time we get to midnight, as Tuesday is giving way to Wednesday, you see how big the lead is, more than 370,000 votes. It got a little bigger than that just after midnight, but that is about the high water mark for President Trump back. And we're doing this to remind people we need to wait for all of the pie. We will get the pie in different order, pieces of the pie in different order. So Trump ahead as Tuesday gave way to Wednesday. 24 hours later, Trump still ahead, but the margin down some. 24 hours after that, Tuesday to Wednesday to Thursday, you see here the Trump lead down to just 1,800 votes. Why? Because counties now are counting. the early ballots, the mail-in ballots, the people who voted early. They've already counted the election day vote. Now they're getting to the early vote, and you see that. And then as you move further, suddenly bang, on November 6th. The election was on November 3rd. As they counted the ballots, as it took time, it was on November 6th that Joe Biden pulled ahead. And from there, the lead just kept growing to 4,300 there, got up to 7,200 there plus. And then again, they've recounted these votes 3 times now. Joe Biden won the state, despite what you hear from the president and his allies. Joe Biden won the state. They've been recounted 3 times. Why did we go through that exercise? Just in moments from now, we're going to start getting votes here. We have the first votes right here. You see the very first votes coming in. They're coming in from over here in Burke County. It's 78, so it's in the middle, 78th of 159 counties in the state by population. You have your first votes in. You have Jon Ossoff up quite considerably over David Perdue. Let's check the other race. About the same margin when you see there in the Warnock-Loeffler race. So let's just go back and take a look at how this was in 2020. This is a hard comparison. That's the presidential race. So we'll look, when we're doing the race to race, we're going to use this race more often because there were so many candidates in the Loeffler-Warnock primary here. And so this is a Republican county, but just narrowly, right? You see it's a smaller county population-wise, 4-point win there for David Perdue. Those are our first votes here as we come into 2021. Let's see if we're getting any more. This is where it gets interesting. We start to count them. But the reason we went through that exercise of what happened in the presidential race is we could see an example of that, maybe the flip side. We may see blue in a lot of places that we expect by the end of the night or by tomorrow will be red. We just have to, as we get votes from counties, it's critical, and this is why we have a great team on the ground and a great team on our decision desk to explain to you which votes are they. Are they votes that were cast today? Are they votes that were mailed in? Are they votes for people who voted early and waited in line? Because those votes will, we know disproportionately the early vote will be Democratic, and it's going to take some time to sort through all this.
All right, let's stand by because those numbers are about to come in. David Chell, you're getting some more information out of the exit polls.
Well, if we're looking at how voters are splitting between Ossoff and Perdue, depending on their age. And this is going to be very telling and a really important finding in these exit poll numbers. Look at senior citizens, older voters, 65 years old and older, okay? They make up 26% of the electorate. They split for Perdue, 62% go to Perdue, 38% go to Ossoff. That's a 24-point advantage. Back in November, Perdue's advantage was more narrow than that with seniors. He won them by 16 points, but here's what's key. They only made up 19% of the electorate in November. It's up 7 points as a share of the electorate. That is a good sign for Perdue. Take a look at younger voters. Jon Ossoff performs much better with younger voters this time around than he did in November. He wins them overwhelmingly, 67% to 33%. That's a 34-point margin. In November, he won them by 11 points. But here's the problem. There are fewer of them. Back then, it was 20% of the electorate, 19%. Now, it's 13% of the electorate. Look at independents. David Perdue is performing better in the runoff among independents than he did in November. Now he gets 48% of them. He got 43% back in November. Ossoff about the same at where he was in November with independents, 52%. And suburbanites, as you hear us talk about the suburbs all the time. Georgia is almost like one big suburb in many respects. 61% of the electorate lives in a suburban area. Take a look at how Perdue's doing in the suburbs. 51%, besting Ossoff, who has 49%. Again, back in November, that number for David Perdue among suburban voters was at 45%. He has improved his performance with independents, with suburbanites, with seniors. That is good news for David Perdue right there, Wolf.
Yeah, potentially very, very good news. We got a key race alert right now. Very, very early, but the numbers are beginning to come in. Look at this, Jon Ossoff, David Perdue. Right now, Jon Ossoff has a tiny little lead, 212 votes, 52.1% to 47.9%. It's very early, 2,598 votes for Ossoff, 2,000 in that Senate runoff. In the other Senate runoff, Raphael Warnock, Kelly Loeffler. Warnock is ahead right now by almost 300 votes, 3,542 for Warnock. Loeffler, 3,243 votes, 52.2%, almost 300 votes, 3,542 for Warnock. Loeffler, 3,243 votes, 52.2%, 47.8%. Extremely early right now, but the Democrats have a very slight lead as these first votes are coming in. A ton of more are about to come in. We'll continue our special coverage right after this. All right, we've got another key race alert. Very, very early, but right now, take a look. The Republicans, all of a sudden, they've taken a very slight lead over the Democrats. David Perdue, he's got a lead of about 220 votes over Jon Ossoff. 4,747 for Perdue, 4,527 for Ossoff. Very, very close, but very, very early. Similar situation on in the other Senate runoff. Kelly Loeffler, she's got a lead right now of about 200. Well, it's just gone up. A bigger lead, a significantly bigger lead, 4,598 vote lead over Raphael Warnock. Now it's 4,009 over Raphael Warnock, 62% to 38%. Let's go over to John King right now. He's taking a closer look at all of this. It's early. I want to caution everybody, very early. These are going to change. Republicans will be on top, Democrats will be on top, but it's interesting to see what's going on. But I know you're taking a close look at DeKalb County, just outside Atlanta. And before you do that, Nick Valencia is there on the ground for us. He's got some new information. What are you learning?
Yeah, DeKalb County, very important for Democrats. Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock need this to secure a win here. And we just got an update from the county spokesperson who tells me that it's been smooth sailing. Though there was a precinct just northeast of here in the Stone Mountain area of DeKalb County that was court-ordered to stay open 5 minutes later at 7:05. They closed their polls there. That's because they got a little bit of a late start. But also an update here on in-person voting today. It is far eclipsed what we saw in the November election as of 6:55. This is just about 5 minutes before polls closed. According to the spokeswoman here, we had 55,000 in-person votes, well eclipsing the totals that we saw in the November election. Today's totals, the spokeswoman says, will likely equal the totals that we saw for the entire general election in November. I'm here at the DeKalb County Board of Elections, where behind me you may see a lot of activity, people coming in and out. They're starting to scan those votes that were cast today. Earlier, they said they had caught up with absentee ballots. But, Wolf, we should remind our viewers that provisional and overseas ballots, those military ballots, have until Friday to be received, so we won't get a final tally here in DeKalb until at least Friday. And just a quick story about the importance here and Georgia voters really understanding the significance. Earlier tonight, I met 25-year-old Rachel Tropper, who this morning, Wolf, woke up in Virginia. The recent college grad is a Georgia resident. She hadn't received her absentee ballot, so this morning at 11 a.m., she made the decision to fly down to Atlanta to vote in person. I asked her how it felt. She said this was for democracy. Just a little bit of a story there, Wolf, about how important it is for these Georgia voters to get their voices heard.
Good
Wolf.
for her. Very impressive indeed. All right, Nick, stand by. We'll get back to you. DeKalb County, outside of Atlanta, a very significant county with a lot of folks.
Right, and so you heard Nick talk about, number one, turnout today, Election Day voting higher than it was in a general election. That's extraordinary. That's actually extraordinary. You just see the first results coming in here from Fulton County now, so let me start there. It's the largest county in the state. It's Atlanta and the suburbs to the southwest and up to the north here. Jon Ossoff at 80%. One of the things we're going to watch throughout the night, we have the Ossoff-Perdue race, 80% to 20% if you round. You come down here, 80%, about the same, roughly the same. I'm going to watch as this plays out, see, it shouldn't be the case, but is one candidate, are the candidates running parallel with each other, or are there any differences? This is the first in Fulton County, so we go back to here, and Nick is in DeKalb County. These results just came in the first again. 435 votes, 278 votes. Just for a little context, first let's come back to the Ossoff-Perdue race, 420 to 290. Just for a little context, go back in time in the primary. We're expecting a lot more votes. This is the presidential race, Biden-Trump there. We can look at the Senate race here, 298-61. So we have a long way to go. But why does it matter? Why does it matter? Well, let's come back to 2021 and remember that the Atlanta area and the suburbs around it not only have to be blue for the Democrats to have a chance, but their margins in these suburbs have to be quite significant. So as you watch the margins now, again, Jon Ossoff getting 80% in Fulton County. Let's go back to the presidential race. Joe Biden got 72%. If Jon Ossoff can be running 80% at the end of the night in Fulton County, the Democrats will be in play. You move over here to Gwinnett County, you see 58%. You come down here to DeKalb, you see 83%, right? This is huge for the Democrats. DeKalb County is absolutely essential to the Democrats. This is the presidential race. This is the Senate race between Perdue and Ossoff back then. And again, David Perdue did a little better than Donald Trump in some of the suburbs, but in this one, he got blown out pretty big there. And so then you come back and what are we seeing early on? Again, 59%. Jon Ossoff has to do a lot better than that in DeKalb County. If Jon Ossoff is not up around close to 80% at the end of the night, then he's in trouble. But again, 423 votes to 290 votes. We are just, Wolf, beginning what will be a long chapter. And you're beginning to see, again, a smattering of votes here and there. Atlanta, the first big population center to come in with a tiny amount of votes. But this will change, especially in the next hour. We were told at the bottom of the hour, into the 8 o'clock hour here in the East Coast, we'll get more and more votes. If you're looking at the map now, you can make no conclusions except for the fact that they are starting to give us votes. And again, what I do on a night like this is you just pop around. You see 1,100 votes. The only thing you would think of is to go back and look, right? So there's Perdue at 70% now. How did he do in November? That's President Trump at 73%. David Perdue at 73%. In the early moments as we go through this, you're just looking for percentages. Does anything seem very different? Is turnout up or down? But when you have only a couple thousand votes and only 120,000, 130,000 when you count them up statewide, it's early. We have a lot of counting to do.
But the difference, the big difference between the outcome, the election results that we're about to get tonight is that, as opposed to November 3rd, when the presidential election took place, is that we're going to get a lot of the early voting coming in right away. We're not going to have to wait 2, 3, 4, 5 days.
We should not have to wait 2, 3, 4, 5 days. Now, that doesn't mean we won't have to wait until tomorrow or beyond to know a winner, depending on how close it is. And it's possible, if it's very, very close, these one or both of these races, that we have to wait till Friday for the military and overseas ballots to come in. They have a 5 o'clock deadline for those. We do expect, though, you're right, we do expect the one big difference here is because of the experience of November, is that most of these counties had the early ballots, whether they're mail-in ballots or whether they're people who came in person to vote early, or the mail-in ballots. They had them ready, they had them processed, and they start counting immediately at 7 o'clock, as opposed to back in November, most of the counties set those aside so they could deal with the rush of Election Day first. So we do expect to get them sooner, which is, again, why we might see, and we just got some more, I'll go to in a second, we might see a lot of blue early on as they start counting these early votes in places that we expect at the end of the night are going to be red. So it's very important that you have patience, as you did in November, as we go through this. I just want to go back and look here because we got Gwinnett County votes since we were standing here. Again, 27% of the estimated vote. We're not sure, what exact percentages will be. Ossoff at 70%. Raphael Warnock at 71% there, tracking roughly. Again, you come back to the 2020 vote, 70% for the Democrats there. Biden got 58. Ossoff got 56. So you're seeing the indication you're so much higher now than you were the last time around. The indication there is that what you're getting is early votes. And as the day of votes come in, it will change a little bit. But again, pull it out. 159 counties. They're starting to trickle in. Most of the early numbers are pretty small, but we're getting going.
Well, 6% of the vote is now in. We have a key race alert. Check it out. And right now, the Democrats are ahead with 6% of the estimated vote in Georgia. Jon Ossoff, he's ahead now by almost 82,000 votes over David Perdue, 159,044 for Ossoff, 77,124 for Perdue. The other Senate race, Raphael Warnock, he's ahead now by almost 85,000 votes, 160,425 for Warnock. 75,693 for Loeffler, 67.9% to 32.1%. 6% of the vote already in. Drew Griffin is in Fulton County for us, watching all of this unfold. You're getting some new information. Drew, what are you learning?
Yeah, I think the big numbers is just how many people in Fulton County, Atlanta, and its suburbs came out to vote in this election, be it absentee, mail-in, or in person today. And 78,000 less than voted in the November election. So while they're beginning to tally up, and we should be getting those numbers spitted out pretty soon here, there is going to be a lot fewer votes counted here in Fulton County. Beginning to tally up, and we should be getting those numbers spitted out pretty soon here. There is going to be a lot fewer votes counted here in Fulton County, according to the elections director, by about 78,000 votes. I can tell you that in-person early voting was around 270,000. The absentee ballots about 108,000. And then in-person today on voting day, they're expecting a total of 72,000 or so. Wolf?
Interesting numbers in Fulton County. John King, what do you think?
Well, number one, we know turnout will be down from the presidential election. But turnout is normally, in these runoff elections, in Georgia's experience, down dramatically. So Drew is absolutely right. In Fulton County, the largest population center, again, known for Atlanta, and then the suburbs around it. The Atlanta airport is actually just to the south in Clayton County, but a predominantly Democratic area, a place where Joe Biden ran it up, a place where Jon Ossoff, the reason there was a runoff is that Jon Ossoff was able to keep David Perdue under 50% because of his support in these Democratic areas. We'll see what happens tonight. In Fulton County, Jon Ossoff has to be at or above, and most Democrats would say above 80%. Keep pushing it up to offset the Republican turnout otherwise. One of the key tests for David Perdue and for Kelly Loeffler, for that matter, is in the suburbs here. We think of Atlanta, Fulton County here, but the suburbs here, traditionally more Republican in Georgia. An animus against President Trump helped Joe Biden in Georgia and across the country in the election. Without Trump on the ballot, does that change? Turnout will be down. I think by the end of the night, Wolf, the question is by how much? Georgia has already shattered turnout records for a runoff. So yes, turnout will be down from the presidential, but it is much higher than any previous runoff. Just the early voting broke the record for a runoff election in Georgia. So it will be down. The question is, when you hear Drew give that evidence in Fulton County, is it down by the same percentages in other places? Or do we have variance from place to place? And I raised the question because one of the challenges tonight is, can Democrats turn out as many voters as possible in places like DeKalb County, in places like Fulton County? That means Atlanta and the suburbs. And can the president, can Republicans turn out voters in these red areas, these rural areas that tend to be smaller? We got these votes earlier up in Murray County. And again, you see David Perdue at 81%. The president had his rally last night over here in Whitfield County. He was here because Republicans were concerned. They saw early voting evidence that Republicans were not participating, and they sent the president in here to try to turn out more votes. So as we get through the end of the night, that what we're hearing from our reporters, turnout down in places like Fulton County. By how much? It will be down. It's not a presidential election, but by how much? And you heard Nick Valencia saying actually here in DeKalb County, just to the east of Atlanta, a hugely Democratic area, absolutely essential to Jon Ossoff and Pastor Warnock tonight that they turn out the votes right here. Nick Valencia is saying the election day turnout actually surpassed what happened in November. Will total turnout pass? We have to get to the absentee ballots and the like first. But so you're going to see different examples from different counties, and the key is putting it all together. And again, when you pop back out just to see if it changed at all, the Democrats ahead right now. The race is not going to end 62-38. It's not going to end that way with either candidate on top or bottom. It's going to be much closer than that. So that's a good guideline early on. If you see a giant margin like that, you know votes are coming in different orders. Advantage Democrats at the moment. We'll see if it lasts.
Stand by. I want to go to David Chalian at the Battleground Desk for us. He's looking very closely at what's going on right now. David, do we know, and I sense we have a sense of how much of the vote that's come in so far is early voting as opposed to today voting?
Yeah, almost all of it is early voting. That's why, as John was just saying, these are not going to be 25-point margin races. We expect closer races. So why do we see that inflated lead right now for the Democrats? Well, look, overall, you see that we have 7% of the vote in. That's our estimate. Right now, we think we've got about 7% of the vote in. But how much of that you're seeing is early vote? 94% right now is made up of pre-election day vote. That's early in-person voting, absentee mail voting. As you know, that is happening a lot more frequently in a pandemic. What do we expect the share of the overall electorate to be early vote? Take a look. 72%. So that's going to come down as election day vote comes in. And we know that election day vote tends to favor the Republican. So that'll allow David Perdue to catch up. You see a similar story, an identical story, really, in the Warnock-Loeffler race. Again, overall, Raphael Warnock with 194,000 votes right now. Kelly Loeffler, 117,000. We've got 7% is our estimate of the overall vote that's in. Of that, 93% of the vote that's in right now is pre-election vote. That is a vote that we know advantages the Democrats. Those more than 3 million votes cast before Election Day had a Democratic advantage to them. What was that going to come down to? That's going to come down, we think, our estimate, 72%. When all the votes are counted, we expect about 72% to have been pre-election. So that means that there's a lot of Election Day vote to come in that's going to bring that bar down, and that could benefit Kelly Loeffler since Republicans tend to show up in greater numbers in person on Election Day, Wolf.
In part, David, because the president kept complaining about all the early voting that was going on in the presidential contest. He wanted people to show up the day of the election despite the coronavirus.
There's no doubt that he encouraged that in November. And since November in Georgia, as he's been questioning the result in Georgia and complaining that somehow totally legitimately cast ballots by mail weren't worthy, that depressed Republicans using that method of voting. So we see more Democrats voting early, voting by mail. Right now, that's making up the bulk of the vote in Georgia. That's why you see that inflated lead for Democrats. And as more and more Election Day vote, which will favor Republicans, we think, come in, you'll see the race and the margins get a lot closer, Wolf.
Yes, I suspect we will. You know, John, the early voting numbers are very impressive for the Democrats. But the today voting is going to probably be very impressive for the Republicans.
Right, which is why, again, pick however you want to describe this, we're getting pieces of the pie in different orders. What matters in the end when you get the total pie, to David's point. And again, you see these disproportionate Democratic leads right now, 60-40 if you round up for Senator Perdue, 60-39 in the other race here. It's not going to end up that way. These are going to be close races. No matter who wins, they're going to be relatively close races. We don't know the final margin. But just for those of you who were with us in November, what we're seeing right now in this Democratic lead is, remember Joe Biden had a big lead in Ohio? Remember Joe Biden had a big lead in Texas? Because those states reported early ballots first. Mail-in ballots first, absentee ballots first, and Joe Biden opened a big lead. And then they counted the Election Day vote, and it went away. In Georgia, President Trump opened up a big lead, and then they counted the mail-in ballots later, and the Democrats came back. So it happens in different ways in different states. Tonight, we're seeing these early votes. I just gave you a couple of examples. In the race right now, this is the Warnock-Loeffler race, but it's the same in the Ossoff-Perdue race. Down here, in the southern part of the state, Reverend Warnock's ahead with 67% of the vote. Well, let's go back to 2020. This is the presidential race. This is a Republican county. Right? As they count the day of votes, the expectation is this will be red. Let's keep an eye on it. It's a small county. It's 20th of the 159. Actually, it's in the upper half, way in the upper half there. We'll keep an eye on that there. But then you come back to this here again. You come over here, and you come south of Augusta, Burke County. You see Ossoff with 74% of the vote here. Just to go back to 2020 and to the Senate race there, this was carried by David Perdue. So what we're seeing right now is not necessarily contextual, Wolf, because it's all early vote.
We're waiting for a lot more votes. They're about to come in. Much more of our special coverage right after this. Election night in America continued. We have a key race alert right now. 11% of the estimated vote is now in. The Democrats still maintain a lead, but their lead has gone down a bit. Jon Ossoff, his lead, about 28,000 votes over David Perdue, the Republican, 53.2% to 46.8%. Take a look at this. Ossoff has 235,000 votes. Perdue has 207,000 votes. Remember, 11% of the estimated vote is in. The other Senate contest, Raphael Warnock, he has a 31,000 vote lead over Kelly Loeffler. 237,000 votes for Warnock, 205,000 votes for Loeffler, 53.5% for Warnock, 46.5% for Loeffler. 11% of the vote is now in. They're counting the votes relatively quickly, Pamela.
Yeah, they absolutely are. And I just got off the phone with the Georgia election official, Gabriel Sterling, who tells me that they are now keeping the state system open an extra 3 hours. It was supposed to close at 11 p.m., and now it's going to be open until 2 a.m. Here's why this matters. That allows officials in Georgia to tabulate more votes tonight up until 2 a.m. with those absentee ballots, because this is the same system they rely on for signature verification. They initially were going to stop counting and working on those absentee ballots at 11 p.m. because they wouldn't have access to that system. That has changed. They have an extra 3 hours to process and tabulate those absentee ballots that, as we know, skew Democratic. He also tells me that a vast majority of results will be known tonight. Those votes that came in before today, more than 3 million votes, he said, will likely be known tonight. And he says that is because officials in Georgia, those election officials, have been staying on top of processing and scanning those absentee ballots so that all they needed to do today when those polls closed was to tabulate them. And we're seeing those results coming in as we speak, Wolf.
Very interesting indeed. They're doing a pretty good job so far counting these votes, John, and they're going to stay open longer so we'll get more results.
So it is possible later in the night we'll have a clearer picture. I'm not going to be crazy and say we're going to know who wins, especially as we expect these races to be close. But it is possible we'll have a much better sense because, as Pam noted, this time it was not optional. It was not optional. They asked the counties to deal with the mail-in ballots, to deal with the absentee ballots, to get them processed, ready to be counted, as opposed to back in November because of the pandemic, because of all the concerns and the complexities. A lot of counties had the options to just set them aside and deal with them after the polls closed and everything. So they're much more prepared this time. Another point, I just want to echo what Pam says. We do see the Democratic lead here. This is the Ossoff-Perdue race, 51 to 48 or 52 to 49 if you want to round up here. You look over the other one, 52 to 48. They're tracking very similar. The Democratic race and the Republican race, small differences, but not significant differences just yet. But remember, we're nowhere near where we need to be to understand the dynamics of this race yet. More than 3 million votes were cast early, not even counting what voted today. 250, 234, right? So we're in the ballpark of 500,000 there. We're in the ballpark of 500,000 counted so far. 3 million were cast early. We expect turnout to be higher. You know, add into what happened today, could be 4 million, could be higher. So we have a long way to go when you're looking at, 485,000 votes counted there when you add up the two races. But as you look at them, just come back and look again. I'm going back and forth to see if there's any big difference. Beginning to see more votes come in from the metropolitan Atlanta area. Critical. Fulton County, the largest. Up to 22%, 80%. That's what a Democrat has to do in Fulton County. Democrats would like that to be a higher percentage. We'll watch what happens. Again, we did see back in the presidential election in November, David Perdue did better than Donald Trump did in Fulton County, the Atlanta suburbs to the south and to the north. We'll see if that only 61% right now for the Democrat Warnock, 60%, 59% for Jon Ossoff. That number for the Democrats has to go higher. DeKalb County is absolutely critical. Democrats want to be. I'll just give you the example. Go back to the presidential race. Joe Biden's getting Democrats has to go higher. DeKalb County is absolutely critical. Democrats want to be. I'll just give you the example. Go back to the presidential race. Joe Biden's getting 83% in DeKalb County. Remember, he just barely won the state with 11,000 votes. So, again, these are early results. There are no conclusions from where we are. But if you're a Democrat and you're looking at the early results, you think, okay, we need to do better than that as more votes come in. But again, look, that's 600, 700 votes as it goes. So we have a long way to go in the total count. Just wandering around as they come in, you're moving more away from Atlanta here. Again, 29% here. Some of the smaller counties will count faster. You pull it out, just to understand the complexities of battleground Georgia, the Democrats need to run it up here. They need to run it up when you get Columbus, when you get Augusta, when you get Savannah. Those have to be not only blue, the margins have to be big. And then one of the big questions, a question that's with even more emphasis, always a big question, but especially in the Trump age, this. Go back to the map here, even when he lost by 11,000 votes. Look at Pennsylvania, look at Georgia, look at any state in America, look at Texas. The smaller rural counties, that is Trump country. One of the big questions tonight, Wolf, is do they turn out? Because, yes, they're Republicans, but they're Trump Republicans. A lot of them have been programmed by their president to not like the Republican establishment. Their president has been attacking the Georgia governor, attacking the Georgia Secretary of State, saying he won this state. He did not, but saying he did. So do those voters come out? So as we watch the map fill in tonight, these areas will be red. We know that. One of the things we'll look at when we get later in the night is that you pull up counties like this. Again, Wilcox County, 132 of 159 in terms of population. So a very small population center here. David Perdue's going to win big, right? So you look 1,100 votes where he is right now. Let's go back to 2020 and hit the Senate race. It was 2,300 then. That's one of the things we want to see at the end of the night is turnout roughly. It's going to be down from a presidential election in most places. Maybe it'll surprise us in some. In most places it will be down. But is he getting the percentage and is turnout at least decent? Is it proportionally down? It's down the same as it is in Democratic counties. That's one of the things you look at the end of the night as we try to answer the question of the Trump effect. He's not on the ballot tonight as he was in November. For the most part, Republicans think that is to their advantage because of the suburban revolt against the president. But if his voters don't turn up in these rural areas, it could be a disadvantage. That's why the next few hours are going to be fascinating.
13% of the estimated vote is now in. Ossoff has almost a 23,000 vote lead over Perdue. You know, it's so interesting, John, because you and I have done this at the Magic Wall over the years. In a state like Georgia, if the Democrat doesn't crush it in the Atlanta area, that Democrat's not going to win. Just like in Florida, if a Democrat doesn't crush it in Miami-Dade or Broward or Palm Beach County in South Florida, that Democrat's not going to win the state.
Right, because if you look, let's go back to the presidential race, and I'll pull out to the national map to do it. If you look at it, some of these states, you see some of these blue states, but take a state like Pennsylvania. There's a whole lot of red right? Donald Trump runs it up in rural America. He did it in Pennsylvania. He lost the state by a lot. Well, not by a lot, but by more than he won it in 2016, 80,000 votes. Why? Because Joe Biden ran it up in the urban areas and in the close-in suburbs. Pennsylvania, Georgia's different, but the basic dynamics are the same. Joe Biden won it. Why? Because he ran it up where people live, in the urban areas and the close-in suburbs, in Atlanta, in Columbus, in Augusta, in Savannah. Run it up in the cities. Increasingly, again, the suburbs are critical tonight. Joe Biden benefited. I'm not criticizing him. He had significant support of his own in the suburbs, but there are a lot of moderate Republicans or independents who lean Republican, who live in suburban America, who just do not like President Trump and cannot vote for President Trump. And that was a factor in Joe Biden's narrow win here. It was a factor in Joe Biden's narrow win in Arizona. It was a factor in Joe Biden's wins everywhere. It's the reason Nancy Pelosi is Speaker of the House, the suburban revolt against Donald Trump. So the Democrats must run it up here. And by run it up, Wolf, let's go back. Again, this is the presidential race, but it matters in the Senate race tonight. Above 70%, well above 70% in Fulton County is critical, absolutely critical to any Democrats. I would argue if the Trump voters are coming out, if conservatives are coming out for the Senate candidates tonight, they might even want to be a little higher than that. You move over here to DeKalb, as I noted, Joe Biden at 83%. So 80% or higher is a ballpark. You get more conservative as you move away, even though they're Democratic suburbs, they're less Democratic as you move away from the urban areas. But again, in Gwinnett County, Joe Biden at 58. So let's see where we are right now and some of the votes coming in here. Ossoff at 70, early votes. So he's disproportionately lifted higher by early votes, but you want to be close to 60. So that's one of the things we're going to watch. There is no question that the Atlanta area, and then we have nothing from Columbus yet, nothing from Chatham County here in Savannah, nothing from up in Augusta. The Democrats need to run it up. And that is one of the questions about turnout. The Democrats do believe they did very well in the early voting, both the in-person early voting and the mail-in early voting. The question is, did they do well enough?
We're getting more numbers. 14% of the estimated vote is now in. Much more of our special coverage coming up.